Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélia. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre. Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Bonne.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Marie. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern.
Présent.
Madame le député Labbé.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Luce.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublay. Monsieur le député Morel.
Présent.
Madame le député de Hegera. Monsieur le député Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves. Madame le député Gardner. Monsieur le député Ghost.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le député Moore.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Coles.
Présent.
Madame le député Poré. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renner.
Présent.
Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet.
Présente.
Madame le député Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le député Miller.
Présente.
Madame le député Howell. Monsieur le député Binet. Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac. Monsieur le député Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il t'a plu de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car à toi la règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
So the Connétable de Saint-Laurent is malade and recuperating from an operation. Could I ask her to be declared malade?
Vous jurez que Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé.
Malade.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Défaut.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Sir, the Constable of St. Martin's is still malade.
Vous jurez que Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé.
Malade.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Marie.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé.
Présente.
Madame le député Alves.
Présente.
Madame le député Poré.
Présente.
Madame le député Kovac.
Defoe. Les États sont constitués. On behalf of all members, I'd like to welcome His Excellency to the Chamber this morning. Connétable St John.
So, if I could just advise members that Amendment 21 is going to be accepted, sir, rather than rejected by the Council of Ministers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Chief Minister.
Sorry, so I was hoping to speak on the debate if we're continuing where we
We'll
left
get to that in a moment. Deputy Tom Binet.
to tell members that I intend to make a short statement about waiting list as advised yesterday at the beginning of the afternoon session, sir, if that's okay.
Well, normally we conclude the budget first, but perhaps we'll come to that later on, considering whether members agree to accept that.
Whatever's required, sir, that's fine.
Right. So we resume the debate on the 32nd amendment, and the next member listed to speak was Deputy Alex Curtis.
Good morning. Thank you, sir. I don't want to spend long on this amendment. Our panel's chair has given a thorough and detailed explanation of the impact and risks if it is not supported. I am also grateful that she has proposed part 2 only. She rightly highlights that as proposed, it is now on the Treasury Minister and Chief Minister to find the funding to make the tough choices. They have the power and perhaps duty to bring forward amendments to reinstate a balanced budget. This is important because it is not for a scrutiny panel to propose where to take money outside their remit. We simply do not have the evidence. That said, we can propose that this cut, these savings, are a significant risk to the department, to the function of its operation. And we ask members to put their weight behind that evidence and agree that there are sufficient areas to resize across government to ensure that this department's budget is protected. The Minister for Environment yesterday said that cuts have been applied proportionately across the Council of Ministers, although he caveated that by saying Frontlines had some protections. So he may think he is playing his part in equal hardship, but we should consider the numbers. Of net revenue expenditure, which for the Department of the Environment is 11 million, they're being asked for savings of £750,000, roughly 6%. The Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning, granted, has more frontline roles, is asked for savings of £1.24 million on a budget of £188 million. The Treasury and Exchequer, largely more back office function, has a savings target of 1.5 million on 46.5 million of net revenue expenditure. No minister is hit harder in the delivery of service than the Minister for Environment in this budget. And the minister gets no grants through growth for any area of their work. It is further harder. The minister recovers some money, a further circa 6 million for the delivery of service that is seen split out through statutory fees. But a turn to the Public Finances Manual shows that fees charged to be there to recoup the costs of delivery of service. Fees should never be used to extract a profit from the user in a user pays charge, and so he should not rely on this money to cross-subsidise any work within his department. So, as already stated by others today, there are areas that ministers can look to reduce money in the budget, because it is indeed still a growth budget. A budget that allocates £52 million in growth bids. As highlighted, these are new, not existing, and it is not, in my view, beyond the ability of the Minister and the Council of Ministers to find £656,000 by cutting the cloth of just these growth bids accordingly. To put that into perspective, the Council of Ministers need only reduce their own appetite for growth in their chosen areas by 1.26%. That's not the government budget, that's a cut to the growth bids of the government's appetite. 1.26% across those will happily deliver a balanced budget and ensure the vital plethora of functions performed by the Environment Department can be delivered. And that is an extensive list of functions. And I want to stress how much of a choice this is. Members can see where those growth allocations are in page 44. The government is investing a further £7 million in the investment into competitiveness in 2026 alone. A 10% reduction to this would equal the savings. Children's service improvements could equally be reduced by 10% to deliver the entire financial ask in 2026. The Minister should read the Children, Education and Home Affairs comments paper to see how costs have increased here. And whilst I know they support that additional funding, we have to make choices. Equally, there are some laudable aims in the Supporting Ireland and Strengthening Communities budget that could be reduced. These do provide more government support for supporting parents with cash grants for school supplies, developing workplace pension policy and extending Pension Plus and the Health Access Scheme, as well as a wider programme of schemes for improving inclusion. And I do see, Sir, ministers shaking my head as if to say, how could we make a choice on these? But that's what we are here to do. We are here to make choices and balance priorities. Those are clearly a wider remit to 25. That is growth. And much as we want to provide these, we must balance what we deliver. The truth is, I don't suggest taking 10% from a competitiveness programme, nor taking £2 off every hour of delivery of new nursery education, nor do I suggest we slash the Supporting Islanders and Strengthening Communities in isolation. But the point is to show the scale of funding across government. Just to growth bids, 1.26%. If ministers feel actually those are more important than work that is going on at the moment, that the growth should be replacing business as usual, then they can target that without even leaving a dent in any of the growth bids. So I think, sir, that we have some tough decisions to make. We do have to ask where our money goes. £656,000 for the environment team to deliver what many could consider frontline services, delivering services for the public, ensuring that we keep working, ensuring that our footpaths are well maintained, that our treaties are upheld, are important elements. I do believe we have to make some choices. We have to curb our expectation in every area. But I do think that this money is evidence-based to be funding the Environment Department, and I do urge members to consider all taking a little bit of a thought as to where they can find that money and funding the Environment Department.
Thank you, Deputy. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the previous speaker, actually, and I hope what I'm going to say might shorten this debate. But we must remember, if we want to curb a growth, we have to be serious about delivering savings. We have to trust the professionals in charge of the departments to identify and deliver services within the budgets they're allocated by this Assembly as part of this process. It's also up to ministers to look at their budget, sometimes to have substantial budgets, and prioritise and reprioritise where they feel they need to spend the money, sir, and that is a process that the Council of Ministers work collegiately on, sir. However, I like to report to members there's been some productive discourse between the ministerial group in the last 12 to 18 hours, and the mood is that we feel obliged, not obliged, but I think we feel, having considered the comments and looked at the budgets, and particularly because part one of the amendment was withdrawn. That was a real challenge, and the opposition was drawing money from the strategic reserve for what ultimately is revenue expenditure, which we could not support under any circumstances. But given the changes, we are pleased to support this amendment, and therefore technically that will be a free vote for excuse me, for ministers. And we have asked Treasury officials to come back with an amendment that looks at growth bids and spreading the difference across the departments. In the scheme of things, it's not. I don't think it's a great burden, and we will be pleased to support it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Deputy Miles.
Thank you. I think I shall put my speech in the shredder, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Doublé?
Thank you, sir. I was going to read out quotes from children and talk about intergenerational fairness, but I won't need to do that now, so thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Tadia.
Thank you, sir. It's interesting that it's going to be a free vote now rather than the ministerial whip to support this. And I think it also shows that the wonder of modern-day lobbying, because it's quite clear, and nobody's said it yet, surprisingly, but clearly the cut in budgets for the Environment Department has stirred up something of a hornet's nest with the public, and we know about it because it's created quite a stir with the chattering classes, but quite rightly so. I think it has to be said at this point, sometimes it's nice to take a short break and distance ourselves, take a step back and look at the politics that's going on here. And clearly I think that some in the Council of Ministers have realised that this is one cut too far and it's alienating them from their traditional electoral base, who are very eloquent and very able to contact states members here. But of course that doesn't mean it's not the right thing for the Council to have taken on board either. My big concern here is that if these cuts were too far, not just from our environmental perspective, but also I look at this through the economic lens, sir, and the Minister was quite, I think, clear in his concerns yesterday when I think he felt that he'd been backed into a corner. He was doing his job as a loyal minister, but that actually there were going to be real negative consequences if we were to follow these cuts through on a proportionate basis to other departments, because we can't compare like for like. And what really concerned me is when he started mentioning, that the fact that our lovely cliff path system, which is really one of the jewels in the crown of the offering that we have to tourists, when they come over here from whichever nationalities and also at whatever time of year, they talk to us about the beautiful scenery, but also how well maintained the cliff paths are, how clean Jersey is and how groomed it all is, and that it's a pleasure for them to come over here. And it does still differentiate our island from other cheaper destinations, but which we can still compete on the overall offerings there. So I think there are wider consequences to this. This wasn't a genuine saving, I don't think. I think this was actually an area where you get a short-term gain, but actually potentially some very long-term pain, which it might be difficult to come back from, sir. So I do acknowledge, notwithstanding my slightly tongue-in-cheek comments earlier, that it's good to see government moving on issues where they think that there is movement, and of course more power to the Chair of Scrutiny.
Thank you, Deputy Morell, your light was on briefly.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and I'm pleased, and I'll be pleased to support this, sir. I just wanted to pick up on one thing to kind of amplify it a little bit, and that was something from Deputy Alex Curtis's speech with regard to the use of fees, particularly through the regulatory area. And I just agree entirely with Deputy Curtis on that. And I think it is something for the next government to look at, is that user fees should not form part of any department's budget, because that in itself creates an inflexibility in the system, and you then cannot adapt that department's budget in any ways or change those services in any ways, because the department becomes reliant on those fees. And so from that perspective, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that I do think in the next government, user fees should all be going straight to Treasury and nowhere else, and departmental budgets should be assessed entirely through the kind of budgetary process and not through the user fees element. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? Conor St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And my speech is going to be somewhat different to what it was 5 minutes ago in view of the Chief Minister's speech. At that stage, I was going to draw particular attention to the fact that the the chair of the Environment Panel comprehensively laid out the circumstances and the concerns that the panel had. I'd like to emphasise the one on the potential that the department would not be able to comply with its statutory regulations. I respectfully remind members to throw their minds back to two or three weeks ago when we considered the dogs law and amendments, and it then became apparent at the 11th hour that certain of the enforcement provisions contained in that law were in fact unenforceable. Not because we were seeking to impose new conditions, but the ones which they borrowed from earlier legislation had actually been taken away from them due to cuts. And I think that's a lesson that all ministers and departments need to bear in mind, that if there are to be cuts and there are to be dangers of not complying with those regulations, then those regulations should be removed. We should not be in a situation where we simply leave them on the statute book and not comply with them. And in that sense, it is, I'm pleased that the Chief Minister has made his statement, because that's an area which affects all departments, not just environment, and we are in danger of damaging our international reputation if we allow that sort of thing to happen. So again, sir, I'm very pleased that the Chief Minister has spoken in the way he has, and I shall obviously be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Conor. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. I rise just to say thank you very much to the scrutiny panel for all the work they've done, and to the officers in the Environment Department who we couldn't manage without, and also to the public who spend many, many hours hunting for hornets. Lots of my friends are up there for days and days and days, and I've been wanting to support them. I've mentioned it before, and I thank the Council of Ministers and the Chief Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor Sambrilla.
Thank you, sir. And following the last speaker, focusing on the hornet situation, I think it's fair to say, so we have an explosion of hornets in the island. And it's not business as usual. The department are faced with having to deal with this massive expansion of nests, and we're relying on the volunteers who are giving their services to the department for no return, and I think it's incumbent on government to support them in that role, which we shall do. It's and I have to refer, sir, to the paths, the certain areas in the parishes, and I mention mine particularly because we have areas such as Noirmore Wood, an extensive area of woodland which was given to the island just after the war as a war memorial, and due to lack of funding has been really neglected, and these are areas which we must try and get back on track. So in closing, sir, like Deputy Howell, I thank the Asian hornet tracking volunteers for their work, and look forward to looking into how we might improve the present system to the benefit of the island as a whole. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor.
So, may I ask for the defo to be raised on Kovacs, please?
I was content to raise the defo, Deputy Kovacs. The defo is raised. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to add my thanks to the volunteers who are involved in combating the hornet invasion, and indeed all volunteers in the island. I think that perhaps there can be some ideological differences on whether we should have volunteers working in this area or even more government employees, and I certainly know which side of the ideology I fall. It also can be regrettable if efficiency savings affect the environment. I know that's very important to many people, and that it does in many ways go hand in hand with the economy and the support that the Council of Ministers wish to give it. I also just want to add my thanks to the scrutiny panel, who clearly have done a good job here. Bye.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? Yes. Minister.
Well, thank you, sir. I feel obliged to say just a few words. Yesterday afternoon, when we started this debate, I had a big sign on the desk on the left of me which read hard, and a big sign on the desk on the right of me which read rock, and I found myself very much between the two. It was going to be a hugely difficult debate for me to speak in, but I just want to say a couple of words of thanks. Before I do that, I want to agree with Deputy Tadyer. I am certainly 100% committed to the well-being of this island is rooted in the environment that we find ourselves living in. Brown cows in green fields, sandy beaches, clean footpaths around our wonderful coastline. And people come to live in the island, people want to stay in the island for the environment that they appreciate. And we forget that at our peril. I also want to thank those people who have spoken, those members who have spoken in favour of or thanking the many volunteers. I have about 500 volunteers that help with the work that's done by my department, not just the 50 or 60 hornet hunters that we have who go out and do fantastic work, and I thank them, but many others that help across the whole of the biodiversity of our island, reporting data to us. I want to thank the scrutiny panel for bringing this amendment, which highlights the massive diversity I have inside my department, from everything from Met Office to fishing and farming and footpaths, and the list goes on and on. And finally, I'd just like to thank my fellow ministers and the Chief Minister in particular for mulling over this situation overnight and agreeing that we will support this amendment today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? I call upon Deputy Jones to reply. Deputy Jones.
Thank you, sir. And I will be brief because we have a lot more to get through in the next few days, but I really want to thank members who've taken the time to contribute to this debate. And I also want to echo other members to say thank you to the volunteers that support our island environment, ranging from those Asian hornet hunters, but also those who do the monitoring of our biodiversity and really show that we are in a biodiversity crisis, not only in globally, but in Jersey itself. And we do need to ensure that that we keep the pressure on to show that we do need to do every help that we can to the environment. But ultimately, of course, I want to thank the Council of Ministers to acknowledging that this amendment does not create new growth, nor does it expand the public sector. It is simply about ensuring the Environment Department can meet the statutory duties that this Assembly has already placed upon it. And it shows that the Assembly wants to support Jersey's natural environment because it's not a discretionary add-on or a nice-to-have, because it is a core public service that protects our health, our safety and our economy. So again, I'd like to thank my scrutiny panel and my officers for supporting me in doing this work. I'd like to thank the Minister again for the time that he's given and all the information he gave to help build our evidence for this amendment. And I'd like to thank again the Council of Ministers. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the appel called for?
Yes, sir.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the chance to cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the amendment has been adopted. 44 votes for, 1 vote contra.
Deputy Andrews voted contra.
Now move on to the 30th amendment proposed by Deputy Wilson. Deputy Wilson, there is an amendment to your amendment lodged by the Council of Ministers which you don't accept, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Thank you very much. I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph B, 6. After the words "in excess of estimates provided in this plan," insert the words "provided that no agricultural loans are to be given for the purpose of supporting the cultivation in Jersey of cannabis-based products for medicinal use."
Deputy Wilson.
Sorry, apologies, sir. I've got a sore throat, so I'm just trying to lubricate my vocal cords. In November 2024, the government published its Rural Economic Framework, a vision for managing our countryside and revitalising what is described as a fragile economic ecosystem. Its intention was to keep Jersey farming and to encourage islanders to support our local food producers. One key proposal within the framework was the re-establishment of the agricultural loan scheme, which had been dormant since 2003. This year we see £5 million allocated, and its purpose was unambiguous, which was to enhance food security and uplift both individual farmers and wider agricultural community to ensure a prosperous, profitable and sustainable future. When this fund was launched, the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development stated that these loans would help the sector to continue to be protectors of Jersey's natural environment. So nothing in that vision spoke of subsidising pharmaceutical crops. Nothing in that intent suggested underwriting the risks of a high-margin, expert-driven medicinal cannabis industry. Regulations were created to help farmers invest in tractors, irrigation, soil improvement, livestock and general agricultural land use. They were designed to protect food security, not to underwrite private, high-value commercial enterprises that operate more like pharmaceutical factories than farms. Yet today the Council of Ministers argues that medicinal cannabis technically fits within the definition of agriculture and that it should be eligible for these loans. And with respect, I cannot support the position and I want to be clear, absolutely clear why. When we speak about agriculture in the context of agricultural loans, we're speaking about something very specific. As I've said before, the law was designed to support the backbone of our rural economy, the cultivation of land for food, the rearing of animals, the stewardship of our countryside, and the protection of traditional farming business. The scheme was created to support the agriculture and use funds for dairy infrastructure, potato storage, glasshouse improvements, equipment and land for farming. And these investments strengthen food production, soil health and the environmental stewardship I referred to. This area is public interest sustainability. It's not commercial speculation. But medicinal cannabis is none of those things. It's not part of our food-producing agricultural base, it doesn't contribute to food resilience, and it doesn't stabilise our traditional farming and agricultural sector. The fund was never intended to finance crops that cannot be eaten and cannot support Jersey's food security. So cannabis is not tomatoes. It contains active pharmacological compounds with medicinal effects and significant risks. Growing cannabis for medicinal use is in fact pharmaceutical manufacturing, not agriculture in the true sense of the word. However valuable some may consider medicinal cannabis as a commercial opportunity, it is not agriculture in any meaningful or statutory sense. It's a licensed narcotic industry. It requires pharmaceutical-grade facilities, high-security operations and controlled environments, and this bears no resemblance to the open field or horticultural activity our agricultural loans were designed to support. To rebadge this activity as agriculture simply to justify access to public subsidy undermines the clarity and the integrity of our agricultural policies. We have a separate licensing regime for medicinal cannabis for a reason, and it should not be financed by loans designed to support farmers who produce the food we eat. The medicinal cannabis sector is highly speculative. It carries export risks, regulatory risks, reputational risks, and a history of rapid commercial failures. If a cannabis operator collapses, as we've seen elsewhere, the public purse is exposed. Agricultural loans were never designed to underwrite that kind of risk. They were designed for a 30-year low-risk investment in farming industries. Just because a project is technically viable doesn't mean it's aligned with public purpose. A cannabis grower could meet every financial test and still be completely inconsistent with the fund's purpose. And I argue, sir, that we are in danger of throwing away £500,000 worth of public money to a highly volatile commercial venture, and yet we are struggling to find money, as we've just heard, to support the Environment Minister with his programme of work. So what this message means is that we are sending, if we allow to a high-profit cannabis operation to access this loan support, that many dairy, potato and horticultural farmers may never be offered the same for untested ventures. This distorts the scheme. It undermines fairness. It risks displacing support from the very farmers that we're trying to help. There are also reputational issues associated with allocating this money. Our agricultural support schemes should align with our public values, our environmental priorities, and have broad social acceptance. We should not be using public money to speculate and back high-risk industry, and even if they do succeed, we still haven't worked how the state benefits. Ministers argue that because medicinal cannabis is an emerging sector, it should remain eligible. So I would suggest that political signalling should not override this fiscal responsibility that we have. If medicinal cannabis has commercial potential, it can and it should be financed through private investment and venture capital. The proper place for cannabis farmers to seek investment is from venture capital, because what it does is it shares the risk as well as share the profit. It's wrong to use the agricultural loan facility because it is a low-cost term loan whose purpose is not to make a profit, but it's to provide support to those who would otherwise struggle to produce food on Jersey. It does not require taxpayer-backed lending, but food security does, soil health does, nutritional resilience does, and our established agricultural economy does. We're told, sir, that regulatory frameworks are being reviewed, and that is precisely why we should not preemptively allow agricultural loans to drift into supporting an industry that is still under regulatory development. This Assembly should be making decisions deliberately and transparently, and once we have the full picture, not by default, not by accident, and not because of technical definitional loopholes. We're told that loans for medicinal cannabis have not been granted, but that's not reassurance, that's evidence that applications are coming and public money could soon be financing high-margin private ventures with no link to Jersey's food or environmental stewardship, food needs or environmental stewardship. And the fact that an amendment has been brought by the government limiting the loan to 10% is a damage limitation exercise. So I believe we're sleepwalking our way into using public money for commercial venture rather than sustainable agriculture, which is why I wanted to bring this amendment. And there is a recognition that there is indeed a significant risk of a lot of money being diverted into cannabis production rather than food production. The Council of Ministers argues that the eligibility for the loan should be broad and inclusive, but public funds must be guided by public purpose, not just by technical eligibility and commercial opportunity. This amendment preserves that purpose. It avoids blurring the lines between agricultural policy and pharmaceutical entrepreneurship. And it maintains a strong dividing line between food production and medicinal cannabis production, because, as I've said, cannabis is not tomatoes. Medicinal cannabis can continue in Jersey, but with the correct legal and commercial frameworks, but it should be funded by private capital. The agricultural loan facility should remain focused on sustainable food production, environmental stewardship, soil and nutrient health, sustainability, and supporting the traditional sectors that define Jersey's agricultural identity. So this is not about opposing the cannabis industry. It is about protecting the integrity of agricultural policy. It is about responsible public finance. It is about political clarity and public trust. It is about maintaining a clear dividing line between food and cannabis when it comes to how public money is used. So the question before us is not whether medicinal cannabis is a viable business. It may well be. The question is whether taxpayer-backed agricultural loans designed for farmers, for food production, and for the stewardship of our rural land should be diverted into a pharmaceutical-designed industry. I believe, sir, that the answer is no, because if we allow this redefinition, if anything grown in a pot under glass can become agriculture, then we dismantle the very purpose of those regulations and abandon the farmers they were created to support. For these reasons, sir, I cannot support the Council of Ministers' position, and I propose my amendment to the Assembly.
Deputy Ranulph.
Yes, can I raise a point of order, sir?
Yes.
can you clarify if members should declare conflicts of interest, where those might be, for example, business relationships with existing or potential medicinal cannabis businesses, including land leasing and so on, or might also include close personal relationships, including friendships with people who run those cannabis businesses?
Yes, you wouldn't need to declare a friendship, but any financial interests you may wish to declare.
Yes, sir. Can I just seek one further point of clarification?
Yes, of course, yes.
I was thinking in particular about point 3 of the Code of Conduct, which says members should not act or take decisions in order to gain financial or other material benefits for themselves, their family, or their friends.
Yes, but the key provision is Standing Order 106, which deals with declarations of interest. And the question is really, do you have a financial interest, you or member of your family, or financial interest in a cannabis business to declare? If you have an interest of that nature, then you should declare it, otherwise you don't need to.
Thank you for that. It was more.
If you're in doubt, then you may want to declare the interest, but it's probably not interest that prevents you from voting or taking part in this debate, from what you've seemed to be saying.
It was for the purposes of the whole assembly. I don't have any interest to declare.
Thank you very much. Deputy Binet, do you wish to speak in the debate, because we're going on to the amendment now, or do you want to declare something?
Declaration, sir. Well, I just wanted to comment on the declaration because I looking across the room, I suspected that comment may have been directed at me, sir, and I'll make it plain that I have done business with all of the cannabis producers over here at one time or another, having been in business here since I left school, but I don't have any financial interest. So I just wanted to clarify that because I had a funny feeling that comment may have been intended for me to respond to, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Rose Binet.
The same goes for me, what the previous speaker has said. Thank you.
Very much. I'll move on to the amendment lodged by the Council of Ministers, and I ask the greffier to... Did I ask someone to second that? Did someone second the proposition? Yes, thank you very much. And I move on to the amendment. I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
After the words "provided that no," insert the words "more than 10% of the total funding allocated to the." After the words "agricultural loans," insert the word "fund."
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I thank Deputy Wilson for her speech and her proposition, sir. Sir, members will be able to see that it is correct, as Deputy Wilson has suggested, that I have proposed, and the Council of Ministers does propose, a compromise. And there are very good reasons for this, sir. And in fact, as I was listening to Deputy Wilson speak, there were a few misconceptions in the speech which can reinforce for me the reasons why I think it is appropriate to maintain a minority, to allow up to 10% of the agricultural loan fund to be used for medicinal cannabis industry. That is not to ring fence 10%, it is very important to say. It is just that if there were applications and they were seen as appropriate applications by the board, up to 10% could be used. So that would be up to £1 million across the industry. And it is very important to confirm that is not ring fencing for the industry. That £1 million could equally not be used on the industry itself. But sir, I think it is really important to address some of the misconceptions. One was the reference throughout Deputy Wilson's speech to agriculture being about food crops. And whilst I think in many people's minds this is what we think, Jersey's agricultural industry has never been solely about food crops, and the heyday of our flour export market is proof of that. And indeed, the agricultural loans law itself refers to flour bulbs and the purchase of equipment for flowers. And so I think, and actually, what is being grown in the cannabis industry is precisely that, a flower. And so I think it is really important that we as an Assembly do understand that the agricultural industry is diverse and is different. whilst the work that I have been doing with my team for the past 4 years has focused on Jersey's agricultural sector and Jersey's food system and the sustainability of Jersey's food system, and that's something that I'm incredibly proud of. None of that work has been in order to exclude other elements of agriculture, and that includes the growing of flowers. It should also be remembered, sir, that Jersey's agriculture sector is primarily an export sector. Most of the crops grown today are exported. They are not consumed locally. And that, I think, is something that's very important. It is a reality that all of the food that we eat, which is locally grown, is grown precisely because it has been effectively subsidised by the exports of the industry. I think as well another element was, and I understood where Deputy Wilson was coming from in terms of the high-value pharmaceutical enterprises that she was talking about. But again, I think that's another misconception. There is at least one, if not two, very large agricultural medicinal cannabis businesses, but there are also much smaller ones, and it's actually the smaller ones that is the reason why I bring this amendment, because medicinal cannabis offers diversification to existing agricultural businesses in Jersey. And I do know that there are farming families in Jersey who operate small farms that are seeking to diversify into medicinal cannabis in order to maintain the whole of the farm itself. Medicinal cannabis will help them in that respect. And to cut off this loans funding would therefore make it much harder for them to diversify and maintain the ongoing financial health of their overall farm. And it is for that reason, primarily, that I feel that it is important to at least maintain the door ajar for them to be able to apply to the agricultural loan scheme. Because if we cannot help existing small farms diversify, then we are making it much harder for them to maintain their world in farming. So there is no doubt in my mind that we do need to be fair to people in this island. And whilst I accept that medicinal cannabis is an industry that some people do struggle with, I think that is as much as anything due to a lack of understanding. And it is also, I would suggest the industry itself needs to significantly improve its communication with the island. So I urge members to support this amendment, which ensures that the Agricultural Loans Fund is deployed strictly in accordance with the legislation that underpins it, while setting a clear limit of 10% on the proportion of funding available to medicinal cannabis producers. The Agricultural Loans Regulations 1974 permit businesses or individuals engaged wholly or mainly in work of an agricultural nature to apply for a loan. Medicinal cannabis production is a horticultural activity, and it therefore satisfies the definition of an agricultural enterprise. Those engaged in this activity are legally entitled to seek finance from the fund. Sir, I would also observe that the Agricultural Loans Fund makes no such distinction for other types of horticultural activity, and as I've said, it does actually directly refer to the growing of flowers. And without this Councillor Minister's amendment, Deputy Wilson's amendment risks shifting the goalposts retrospectively. So far, in 2025, 9 applications have been formally recommended for approval by the Agricultural Loans Board. This totals over £4 million in loans that are either completed or in process. None of these loans have yet been from medicinal cannabis producers, but there is engagement with the scheme from businesses in this sector. It would, in my view, and this also speaks to the wider concept of Jersey actually having a stable business foundation to attract investment into the island, it would be inappropriate after the scheme has been rekindled as it was a couple of years ago, to now block them from accessing loans when they are permitted to apply under the current legislation. And in some cases themselves have invested considerable time and finance in preparing for that application process. I do understand, sir, that agriculture is an emotive subject on the island. It is one that we rightly feel passionate about. It is one that I feel passionate about. But it is with this in mind that we must be robust in how we use the Agricultural Loans Fund. Applications should be dealt with on their own merits, not prioritised or deprioritised simply because of our views about the crop involved. Members will have seen in the report accompanying the Council of Ministers amendment and the details of the application process required of all applicants. Jersey Business verifies proposals. Qualified accountants review them, and the Agricultural Loans and Guarantees Advisory Board then makes recommendations to the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. For loans above £150,000, the Treasury Minister must also approve. This multi-stage review ensures that strategic investment decisions are properly managed. I recognise that members may be concerned about the potential scale of investment involved in the medicinal cannabis sector. And of course, the Loans Fund has limited resources. That's precisely why we have sought a compromise by setting a maximum level of funding accessible to the medicinal cannabis sector as a whole. Subject to a decision of the Minister for Treasury to approve a transfer of the Consolidated Fund to the Agricultural Loans Fund in 2026 of up to £5 million, the total fund would then sit at £10 million. This fund would then evolve as repayments begin to become available to recycle back into the pot. Sir, there is no doubt in my mind that Amendment 30 would signal a lack of political support for an emerging area of agriculture, which has significant export potential and could contribute to the sustainable economic growth of the industry. The Loans Fund should remain distinct from debates about local regulation of medicinal cannabis and instead focus on supporting viable agricultural enterprises. And we do this, I know, farm near me, which has moved into accommodation as a part of that diversification. I therefore urge members to support our amendment, sir, because I think not only is it the fairest way forward for the island, it is a way which ensures that we limit access from that sector, because I do understand that members could be concerned that large enterprises could seek significant amounts or significant proportions of the loans pot. I also am aware, sir, I can't remember exactly how it panned out, but I know we had this same debate, I believe, 12 months ago, sir, and members did then support the 10% allocation. There was another reason afterwards why, and I can't remember what happened, but technically it fell through in the end. I can't remember how. But so I do ask members to support business in Jersey, to support the agricultural sector by allowing that diversification where it is appropriate, and by not signalling that we invite business to Jersey, as we have done over the last 6 or 7 years, and then to some extent say, actually, we want to treat you differently now. And so I think it is appropriate that particularly those smaller Jersey farms that are looking to diversify into medicinal cannabis are able to access at least a minority of this fund to help them in that diversification. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Is amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I think today's been a good example of why you don't always come into a debate listening and with a preconceived idea. Because originally my thought was that I didn't actually agree with the Minister for Economic Development, because personally, sir, I don't think this fund should be limited down to just 10% for people who are trying to diversify their agricultural businesses. But actually, he's right. It is better to support something at this stage that can see that the fund is still used to help farmers transition from one type of agriculture to another. As he says, we may not always agree with the product that is being grown. I mean, my fellow members of the planning committee saw an application on Thursday which saw a farmer over here wanting to start growing hops, and grains and barley, sir, because he wants to make alcohol. And so that is still a form of agriculture. It is still growing, but not everybody will agree with the alcohol industry. I'm not one of those people, sir, but those people do exist. Jersey farmers are struggling. We do know that. The cost of export is becoming a challenge. The competitive market in which they are exporting into is a challenge. And so, sir, we're looking to diversify in what they grow to make sure we do have an agricultural industry in Jersey. So, sir, it is a challenge because obviously I get that cannabis is a motive, and we have had some growers over here who have not necessarily been the best to their neighbours. But that doesn't mean that everybody is. Everybody's going to be terrible to their neighbours, sir. I do think that we need to make sure that our farmland and our agricultural industries survive in the island, because otherwise we'll see bad practices of people leaving their glass houses go absolutely to wreck and ruin, just simply so they can maybe become houses. And all of a sudden we have more developed land in our rural environment than actually rural activity. So, sir, my initial instinct was to actually dismiss the Minister's amendment and also dismiss the initial amendment itself. But so I think now that I will support the Minister's amendment. However, I still won't be supporting the amendment as a whole.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. This Assembly has made a number of important and carefully considered decisions regarding medicinal cannabis in recent years. We've chosen to permit its cultivation under very strict regulatory conditions. We've chosen to treat it as a controlled substance requiring a licensing and compliance regime aligned with international expectations. And crucially, in the debate in 2021, and again in discussions surrounding the development of the medicinal cannabis regulatory framework, members were clear that this had to be a privately funded, commercial and industry-driven activity, not an area subsidised or underwritten by the taxpayer. And one of the expectations presented was that Jersey could benefit from meaningful tax revenues generated by the sector. It's important to acknowledge, sir, that those anticipated tax returns don't appear to have materialised to the degree suggested at the time. And despite the initial optimism, the industry has not yet delivered the scale of revenue or wider economic uplift that was forecast. Now, that is not a criticism of the businesses involved. International markets have shifted dramatically, oversupply has driven prices down, and regulatory complexities have increased worldwide. But it does underline a critical point. This is a commercially volatile, high-risk sector. And if the industry has struggled to produce a predicted revenue for the public purse, it would be even less appropriate to now expose taxpayers to further risk by offering publicly supported loans or financial guarantees. This Assembly was assured that the medicinal cannabis sector would be a net contributor to public finances, not a recipient of them. And similarly, when this Assembly reaffirmed its purpose of the agricultural loan scheme during the review of the rural support policy, we endorse the principle that public funding should prioritise food production, soil health, environmental resilience, and the sustainability of traditional agricultural holdings. Again, those decisions were not made lightly. We should ensure that we remain consistent with the principles already agreed. So, medicinal cannabis is fundamentally different in nature, purpose, and risk profile from the activities that the scheme was designed to support. Cannabis is a controlled drug with active pharmacological compounds. When grown for medical use, the operation becomes part of a pharmaceutical supply chain. As Deputy Wilson said, regulated, highly specialised and commercially volatile. It simply cannot be considered to be the equivalent of tomatoes, flowers or courgettes. To classify it as horticulture for the purpose of accessing public finance is a departure from our own previous decisions. I think it reinterprets the scheme in a way that members have actually never endorsed, and it would be to blur the very clear line we have rightly maintained between supporting agriculture and subsidising pharmaceutical manufacturing. Medicinal cannabis is a high-risk, commercially driven industry. International markets fluctuate rapidly. Regulatory burdens are substantial, and these are risks that private investors should choose to take on, but they are not appropriate for public exposure, even if it's only up to a percentage of our agricultural loan scheme. In my view, the medicinal cannabis sector may operate in Jersey, but it must operate on a private basis, without recourse to public subsidy or financial guarantees, even 10% of it. So we know that we have pressing environmental responsibilities, we have soil degradation problems, we have food security issues, and climate change are among the most urgent challenges facing our rural sector. The agricultural loan scheme is one of the very few policy levers available to us to support resilience in these areas. Every pound allocated through the scheme has the potential to enhance food production capacity, improve soil and nutritional health, strengthen supply chains, and support climate adaptation. Allowing any funding to be diverted into subsidising a specialised pharmaceutical industry, contrary to the direction of travel this Assembly has established, would undermine these priorities and dilute the scheme's original purpose. So we should also acknowledge that until this Assembly has full visibility of the regulatory, enforcement and compliance costs associated with medicinal cannabis production, it wouldn't be a responsible thing to open the door, even at a low level, to public financial exposure. So I will not be supporting this amendment to the amendment.
Point of
Sir,
clarification.
point of clarification. Yes, please, sir.
It's just point of clarification, Deputy Miles.
No, thank you, sir.
Deputy Ballard. Deputy Ballard.
So it's, for me, this reduces to quite a simple question, actually. Is this truly agriculture, or is it an industrial enterprise? And I must confess that it doesn't look to me like agriculture. It may very well be that the growing of cannabis should be supported as an industrial enterprise by the Minister, but that's a different matter. The question is whether this can truly be regarded as agriculture, for which the island has set up a special subsidised scheme to ensure that loans are available to bona fide farmers carrying out what we would all regard, generally speaking, as farming. And farming does include horticulture, includes the raising of cattle, treating of cattle. All these things, it seems to me, as a matter of common sense, one would regard as agricultural. I, for my part, find it quite difficult to conclude that the growing of a plant for the purpose of creating an industrial product, a medicinal product, falls really within this category.
Thank you, Deputy. There's Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. And for a second debate in a row, I find myself in a difficult position. As members will know, I was the backbencher that brought forward the proposition to recapitalise the agricultural loan scheme some 2 and a bit years ago now. And I've said it in this chamber before, and I've said it publicly before, and I say it again. At that time, the last thing I envisaged was this money being used for the growing of medicinal cannabis. That money I wanted was for keeping our brown cows and our green fields, our island green and beautiful, our farming community in good health, and our fields cultivated. And it didn't really at any point include greenhouses. Having said that, during the Economic Development Minister's speech, I have found myself thinking along the lines of Deputy Coles and thinking of other agricultural crops which end up in sort of non-agricultural places, if you like. And of course, the growing of crops to make alcohol would be one. Potentially the growing of crops to fuel energy supplies would be another. They're not all about food. And certainly I didn't exclude the growing of flowers when I had my vision of the future of agriculture in Jersey. I myself have grown anemones, I've grown lilies, I've grown daffodils in quite large quantities outside and indoors, and they're part of our island heritage. I then found myself thinking during the Minister's speech about the difference between growing and when that agricultural process becomes the industrial process that Deputy Ballard just spoke about, and of course he's quite right. And cannabis is a plant that's grown in a greenhouse just like any other plant, and it gets to a point of harvest, and at that point is where the industrialisation, if you like, takes over, the processing. the value, the enormous value, starts to be realised, because as with many plants, it's only when you process them that you see the benefit of what you're finally trying to achieve. When I sought the money for the agricultural loan scheme, one of the reasons I didn't think about cannabis was the fact that the monies involved, the investment required, the cost of production, the massive amount of money that's paid for the final product, the numbers are far, far in excess of anything that would ever happen in agriculture in Jersey. It's not millions, it's tens of millions. And the returns, the profits, the numbers are all multiplied by 10, 20, 50 plus that you would get and receive from a normal agricultural crop. So I am in a difficult spot here. When I proposed the recapitalisation of agricultural loans, I did not intend this money to go for medicinal cannabis, but I take the points that the Minister's made on board. We need to treat people fairly, and I know there are some farmers on the island that only intend to grow the crop. They do not intend to process it, which then puts us into another dilemma of whether we support it or not. I personally will be in a difficult position on this particular vote, because, as I said right at the start, when I proposed this money, the last thing I had in mind was medicinal cannabis. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, actually, to the Minister. Listen to the speech, because it is got a bit complex that we all expected. And I believe this is time to look at the agricultural loan regulations and to adjust them where we are now. My speech will be cut now because Deputy Miles and Deputy Balash took probably 50% of my speech, which is great. One point, the main point I would like to add. There is a big difference around the world. And we are, by the way, late takers. We were not pioneers in cannabis growth industry, in the medical cannabis, by any means. If you will think about a country or two who were the first that started, Canada come as a first in your mind, Malta as the second. What's happened in these countries, it's really, really interesting. And if you look through around the world, with countries who were the first, it was the same story unfold. Initial excitement about cannabis cultivation, followed by quickly market collapse if they concentrated at cannabis as an agriculture. Where was it successful and managed to survive? It was when they concentrated on the farmer, high-grade, different type of growth. For example, in Canada, between legislation and mid-2023, Canadian license holders destroyed over 1.7 billion grams, 3.7 million pounds of unsold dry cannabis because they couldn't sell it. In December 2023, there were 53.7 million package units sitting unsold in Canada because it was not requested. So in Canada, oversupply has been extreme, and it did damage, obviously, the economy. Now, in Portugal, there is a commentators talk about a bottleneck, aging stock, price drops as product piles while regulators struggle with approvals, leading to oversupply of bulk products look as home. Basically, across the Europe, also Denmark and Portugal faced overcapacity of the basic cannabis growth. Again, the only part of the industry that consistently survived was a large pharmaceutical companies with vertically integrated supply chains, not small growers relying on government support. And I know that we are not a big country, we are small. At the same time, we don't have good history with managing risks around the loans. And I'm really, really worried that high risk, value-added industry like an agricultural growth, not the pharmaceutical that hopefully will bring us income that we are all expected, might be problematic. By the way, it's important to say there is a difference between hemp and cannabis. And I believe hemp is an agriculture, we debated previously, and it can contribute to our agriculture in various things. But this is why I'm coming back where I started. I believe that it's time to change agricultural loans, Jersey Regulation 74, and make clear what is agriculture, what is not in agriculture, where is high risk, where is not a high risk. So the amendment for me does exactly what it needs to be done, that agricultural loans will be used for what we count as an agriculture, and this is why we'll be rejecting government amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I obviously rise in support of the Minister's amendment, and I would just like to give some background about the agricultural loans we are at the moment. Sir, £5 million has been transferred to the Agricultural Loans Fund in 2025. A £5 million contingent transfer is proposed in 2026, and £3 million is currently being held in reserve for this purpose. So far in 2025, there have been 9 applications formally approved by the Agricultural Loans Board, with a total of over £4 million worth of loans complete or in process. None have yet been made for medicinal cannabis, but there has been some active engagement from a small number of businesses in the sector. Deputy Gardner mentioned the regulations. The regulations do currently define eligibility, and to exclude one sector would be inconsistent with that eligibility framework. The regulations, unfortunately she's not here, the regulations are actively under review, and some degree of modernisation is already expected and in train. And I would suggest to members that it is far, far better to allow the Minister to continue that work of addressing eligibility in the context of the full review rather than a piecemeal way through amendments. There are strong oversight and checks already in place. Applications are made in the first instance to Jersey Business. They are then verified by accountants, and it should come as no surprise to anybody that those people conducting the reviews will be considering both the risk of the relevant business of the industry as a whole and whether or not they can afford to pay on a sustainable basis. It's reviewed by the Agricultural Loans and Guarantee Board after that, who then make a recommendation to the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. Any loans over £150,000 then require my approval as Minister for Treasury approval, and I can assure you that my team look at all of these very, very carefully before agreeing to, before they then recommend to me my giving of approval. I think we also have to, a couple of speakers now have commented on the inherent risk in cannabis growing. I believe, sir, I've been told that there are 300,000 tonnes of Jersey Royals go to waste every year because they're not the right shape or size. And those potatoes are now being used by an entrepreneur to make vodka. Do we cut the vodka production of potatoes out of the loan mechanism? And we also have to remember that agriculture itself, in any context, is highly risky. Bad weather, whether it's drought or heavy rain, can affect any food producer. And we also have to remember the absolutely tragic loss of a very large dairy herd last year. The whole of agriculture is subject to risk from a huge number of environmental constraints that are out with farmers' control. That doesn't mean to say we should stop giving them loans. If we took risk-based decisions on whether or not somebody could grow a field of tomatoes because of the weather, we wouldn't make any loans. So, sir, I support the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Does anyone else wish to speak? Constable Griffith.
Yes, thank you, sir. Just a slight correction to the Minister's supposition just now. The total tonnage of Jersey Royals grown in the island could very rarely, if ever, exceed 150,000 tonnes in total. let alone the waste that came from that crop, because there's 30,000 verges, a maximum weight of 5 tonnes of verges. So a little bit, I don't know where she's got that source, but I'd like to talk about the production of cannabis. I believe is a factory organism, if you will. It can be grown practically anywhere. In fact, as Deputy Coles quite rightly said, on our visit to one of these particular units, we discovered that it's completely clad, it's a glass house, but completely clad in metal cladding to eliminate sunlight, to eliminate the energy going into that unit, the energy provided by the sun, which creates too much heat. And we've just had a planning application about some chillers, quite famously, that required to keep the temperature regulated within that structure. So is that agriculture? Well, I would say mushrooms are produced in the dark, sir. They have been for many years, or were, I should say, in the tunnels created by our invading German forces during the war. So, unfortunately, that no longer happens in what I've been told. But, sir, in one journey I made in the wonderful city of Liverpool, across right from one side of Liverpool to the other in a taxi, I saw a very long row of houses. And right in the middle of that row of houses, sir, was a roof of a house covered in pigeons. And I asked the question of the taxi driver. I already knew the answer. I said, what on earth is going on in that house? And he said, and I, like I said, already knew the answer, he said, they grow wacky-backy up there, say. Because, of course, they are produced in a loft with heat lamps that make the pigeons' feet nice and cosy in the month of November in the city of Liverpool, and they were quite grateful for that, their nice warm feet, sir. So that actually proves the point that cannabis can be grown underground, it can be grown in a shed, it can be grown in a loft. So how relevant is that as an agricultural crop? I'm sorry, but I disagree if it's defined as an agricultural crop, sir. Thank you.
Conotaba, St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. And as an addendum to my colleagues, police in the Midlands often look around to see when it's had a heavy snow, where the snow is melted on certain houses.
Yes.
They're worthy of further investigation. So anyone that knows me, sir, know that I am quite anti-drug. I always have been. But I'll be the first to admit that with certain drugs, there can be extracts taken out for medicinal purposes. For instance, morphine is an extract of the poppy, which was discovered in the 1800s and named after the Greek god of dreams, Morpheus. So there is a clue there. But generally speaking, not in favour of growing of cannabis, even though in certain circumstances extracts can be taken. I will be supporting the main proposition, but I'm not sure about the amendment. I will wait to hear from colleagues here. Thank you.
So I've only been moved to respond to some of the comments that have been made, because I think we've moved quite far away, or risking moving far away from the original debate, sir. I'm just minded to say that you can't always judge whether somebody's growing cannabis in their loft by a heat map, as the poor couple that were in the news in the UK recently found out. So you have these 78-year-old and an 80-year-old enjoying their breakfast at 9 in the morning. Their door gets battered down by the police simply because they had the heating on. Putting the heating on when you're a pensioner in the UK is such a rare event nowadays that they just presume that somebody must be growing cannabis in there if there's any excess heat coming out of the property. And I must admit, when the constable started talking about underground, overground, I expected him to burst into song with the Womble song there, sir. So I think we may need to get back to basics here. So I do ask the question, what is the problem that we're trying to resolve? What is it that we're worrying about? We've been told that no cannabis farms over here have applied yet to the loan. Yet some members are trying to take preemptive action, that if they ever were to try and apply for a business grant, that they would be stopped from doing so. And I would simply say that maybe I'm old-fashioned, but if you grow something, if you grow plants and then you sell them for whatever purpose, that's agriculture. What I would say isn't agriculture is putting solar panels on fields. That isn't agriculture. That's not growing anything, and it's not looking after livestock. And so I don't want to digress too much, but certainly there are limitations. I think we're conflating two issues here. I think there is an issue that still needs to be discussed fully. It's perhaps something that scrutiny needs to consider as a cross-panel review in future. Maybe it's something it needs to consider in its legacy report, because it does cross not just the economic department, but also environment and I think health departments, in terms of if pharmaceuticals, or rather if ingredients are being made which then go on to become pharmaceuticals, that ultimately is a regulatory issue, not one about whether or not what they're growing is agriculture. Because as we know, hemp can be used for different purposes, and quite rightly, Constable of St Saviour's has already alluded to the fact that poppies do get grown, not just because they look pretty, but because you can extract morphine and codeine from them, and then they're very lucrative or very useful, certainly for painkillers. And we know that, for example, New Zealand's got a big licit poppy growing industry, which is then sold. If we look at what the basis of the agricultural loans fund's aims are, it's to empower farmers and agricultural enterprises to drive and support growth, spark innovation and build resilience. And if that growth somehow happens to be in the cannabis-related industries, why would we not want them to be able to grow, spark innovation and build resilience? I mean, it seems at the moment we're saying, but they don't pay enough, they don't pay tax at the moment, so it's not a lucrative industry. But at the same time, they're not applying for these grants anyway, so they seem to be self-sufficient. But if they said, we want to actually apply for these grants because we think we can make our industry more innovative, create growth, and ultimately have more jobs in the island, then I don't see why we wouldn't ultimately leave that to the criteria of the scheme and to Jersey Business to triage the applications and put them alongside every other one. Now, already the Minister's saying that he wants to bring an amendment anyway, and so that there will be limits on how much funding that they can get. So I think he is very much meeting the mover of the proposition halfway. I probably share Deputy Cole's concern that actually the amendment isn't really necessary, and I think it's been put in there as a safeguard. It's not to say that I'm fully behind a rampant pharmaceutical cannabis industry. I think there are serious questions that do need to be raised about regulation and quality control when it comes to Jersey doing this viably, and it's arguably something that has not been fully thought through as an industry. But I don't think the limitation on the agricultural loan scheme, which is ultimately there to drive efficiencies and to spark economic growth, ultimately is something that should be used to combat this. Lastly, I'd much prefer to see greenhouses used than the many dilapidated greenhouses that we see still around the island. I prefer them to be in use, growing whatever, tomatoes, cannabis, all sorts of flowers, whatever, and then it's, of course, they're going to have different uses, sir. So if this in some way in the future just leaves the door open for all industries to be supported, I think that is ultimately what the purpose of the scheme was for.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I've got perhaps a slightly different take on this, because for me it isn't about the definition of farming. I'm not actually hung up about whether or not medicinal cannabis counts as farming or not. I think it's perfectly reasonable to argue, as Deputy Taddia says, that this could be a new use for redundant glass sites and so on. So as I say, I'm not opposed to the industry, but my issue is more with risk. And I think I take note of what Deputy Miles reminded us, which is that this is a highly risky business. And it is generally funded by private equity, venture capital, and so on, because it is acknowledged to be high risk. And so the question in my mind is, should the taxpayer be involved in stepping in where private investors have decided not to tread? If the private market, if businesses who want to get involved in this sector are unable to raise the money in the private market, why is the government stepping in? Now, the agricultural loan scheme, of course, steps in where there is market failure in other sectors, but it does so on the basis of a very well understood business models, and it does so with very clear, wider policy framework that wants to support those sectors. And so that is understandable, and people can see the point of that. But I do struggle to understand why the taxpayer should be taking on this risk that apparently the market is not prepared to take on. And so to answer the question that Deputy Tadia asked, which is what is the problem we are trying to solve, I think it is to remove the temptation to make loans that might be higher risk than others. And of course, it is reasonable to say that that the panel deciding and the minister deciding and so on will be fully aware of potential risks and so on, and will be taking them into account. But they will be doing so also within a stated desire to expand this industry, to support this industry, and they will also be doing it in a context where they have nothing, no particular, not much in the way of experience in which to build. When it comes to giving loans to a dairy farmer, we have a lot of information to hand. When it comes to giving loans to medicinal cannabis, potential medicinal cannabis businesses, we have very little information to hand. And as we've heard, it is in any case an exceptionally volatile sector. So my concern, I think, is, as I say, not so much with the question of whether it is farming. I'm quite comfortable with the medicinal cannabis industry in Jersey. My concern is with the risk that sits around this, and the fact that every time we give a loan to a medicinal cannabis business, we have less money to give elsewhere to areas that when the loan scheme was set up, we were all pretty clear, we understood what they were. So I think on that basis, I shall probably have to vote against this amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I think members know I'm quite interested in agriculture and horticulture, and I've followed a range of the types of industries it exists in. And I want to first address the comments made by Deputy Renniff issuing kind of a repeat of some arguments about risk. Second, I want to look at what does agriculture look like and the argument to provide on that. And third, those on what makes an area agriculturally successful. First, on risk, it would be fair to say that probably the growing of cannabis, especially for smaller growers, craft growers, as I think these would be more likely to be fitting a loan to be funding, is more risky than other crops. But I would disagree that Deputy Renniff said that the agricultural loan system is one to fund incredibly well-trusted business models, well-rehearsed. The loan scheme has been going since at least 1974. Previous iterations may have existed before that. And what is well known to us, in fact, what is no longer sustainable for farming, at one point was emerging. At one point was a different model. Viewing the island's history through aerial images will show the change in cultivation practices, the rapid growth of glass houses, the change from wood glass houses to those with steel aluminium frames. The industry is constantly changing, and I think it's easy to look in retrospect and say, well, actually, we know what would be going forward is low risk. Funding growing for local food systems is not actually low risk either. The capital investment to provide food in today's modern supply chains is not a low risk thing to do. That is why funding is there to help support that. So a 10% allowance, I think, would be what we call risk mitigation. And I think the Minister alluded to the kind of the balance. So I think we are acknowledging a risk and we are mitigating that risk with this amendment. Deputy Renniff also mentions why the money can't be found in the private market. Well, we've had contact from those who wish to consider the facility provided by the agricultural loans. They've been very good to share their business models, their financing. And one reason they might not is because they are more local producers, those who want to retain in farming. These are not necessarily imported companies who have the expertise in using the private market, nor necessarily need the scale that the private markets of investment would provide. Maybe they also want to retain equity on island, and a loan would do that. Second, what does agriculture look like? We've heard that agriculture and the crops from agriculture come in many forms. And to be honest, the form that we see modern medicinal cannabis or any cannabis growing looks no real different to that of the highly optimised protected crop growing that we see in areas like the Netherlands or the south of Spain. There is thorough quality control, QR codes used throughout the system, no different to a Japanese factory which originally invented the system of tagging items. It is heavily mechanised, lower in labour, but it is highly skilled. So the image of it is really no different. And Deputy Morell, the Minister, highlighted that the history of Jersey's agriculture has been one of export. We have funded and supported the industry to provide it an identity and ultimately economic value. The export of flowers or tomatoes created sites on our landscape which were not necessarily, let's say, picture postcard bucolic, to use a planning inspector's words, but showed a working landscape that provided a use of the land for the island to use. So I think what we see is something that can be considered agriculture. And third, I want to touch on what makes agriculture successful in any jurisdiction. And the answer is one that this Assembly tries to get to grips with a lot. It's adjacencies, but most importantly, it's skill. Why does Jersey grow the Jersey Royal? We've got some nice sun, we've probably got some nice maritime climates for early crops, but we have an established industry, a set of skills on Ireland and a supply chain that is highly geared to providing that crop out to the early market, and there are many in this Assembly far better to speak about it. Why does any industry consolidate around an area? Why does Te Puke in New Zealand have the growing of almost 50% of the entire of the New Zealand's kiwi fruit, or Kati Kati be the avocado centre of growing? Why is Yakima Valley the perfect place to grow hops? Or Nelson in South Island? Their climate plays one role, but a lot of it is about the fact that these areas build infrastructure around agriculture. They champion that agricultural skills can provide the adjacencies. So you go to these areas, they share the knowledge and infrastructure for spraying. You know, if you go to a kiwi fruit orchard, the sprayers are low enough and shared between the pack houses so that when they go into an orchard, they can go below the canopy that forms. You go to a hop estate in Yakima, the cooperatives can share and have resource together. And likewise, they can share through people leaving and joining other companies' expertise. And when we look at the skills required in the horticulture of cannabis, they are not so different to other skills that we do want to retain on Ireland. The island still thrives with the Eric Young Orchid Foundation, the cataloguing, the genetic tagging and the continued growth of orchids exists on Ireland, and we have many horticulturalists employed there who may want to know they have other opportunities in the island. And these skills, I can attest from those I know, are suitably transferable and is what will make us a place with more attractive skills. This goes as far as to understanding the horticultural requirements for ventilation, and having visited a site, I know that not only has some of the ventilation installations and the horticultural supplies been installed by local fabricators, those skills are now more adept to apply to other areas of traditional horticulture. So I think, sir, we could debate all end whether 10% or 0% is important or whether it is agriculture or not. But what I would say is, what are we trying to achieve? And I think a thriving, balanced and diverse agricultural sector is the ambition behind the Agricultural Loans Fund. I think risk mitigation is important, and I do think that the Minister's pragmatic approach mitigates risk in any one industry, whilst showing that we ultimately, to succeed, need skill, supply chain adjacency and encouragement.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else to speak on the amendments? If no one else wishes to speak, I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Whoops. Thank you, sir. And I thank everyone who has spoken in this debate, sir. I think there are a few things that I think are worth noticing. I think it is worth talking about the approvals process for the Agricultural Loans Board. They do, as a kind of matter of course, not back or not provide loans for high-risk projects, and I think that's been borne out over the past year or so of it operating. They have repeatedly pushed back against anything that is deemed high risk in their view. I mentioned that the amendment that I've proposed, or the Council of Ministers proposes, not ring fencing. It is only up to 10%. I think really importantly, and this was alluded to by one of the speakers, is that we are going to be bringing forward new regulations to the loan scheme. And so at the moment, we're covered under 1974 regulations, and it will be no surprise to the Assembly, they are not perhaps entirely fit for purpose. And so we will be bringing forward new regulations. And I think it would be an appropriate debate to have at that time as to whether those any restrictions that people wish to have on there. I think that would be the appropriate place to do it, and so that the law itself, would have any exceptions rather than doing it through such a way here. That's we'll be bringing forward that loan scheme in order to create the possibility for variable interest. So at the moment, it's very much just a single fixed rate. And also we'll be seeking for it to be widened beyond agriculture to fishing and aquaculture as well. And so these are things that the Assembly will likely be asked to opine upon, not this side of the elections. I believe it will be after the elections. But these are things, and so I think this debate would be a perfectly reasonable debate to be had there. It would be probably, in my view, a more appropriate debate to be had there. I will stand by what I believe is correct, that in Jersey we have an agriculture sector which is constantly changing and adapting. It has not and never will focus solely on food. It is an export-dominated agriculture sector, and that includes the non-food items. And it's true, since the demise of Flying Flowers, which happens to be on the same site as what is now the largest of the cannabis companies, Flying Flowers did export hugely from this island. Flowers, not food at all. And but I do understand why the scale of some plants, cannabis plants in this island, leads people to think about the factory-like nature of it. What I would say is it is absolutely correct that when you're growing cannabis, it is agriculture. When you're processing it, it is different. And that might be something when we come to debate regulations in the agricultural loans law that maybe want to pick out as a point of difference as well, the processing as opposed to the actual growing as two different things as well. I am concerned that I am always concerned that in Jersey we send out so many mixed messages to people looking to invest in this island. We do it in the construction industry by constantly changing sizes, constantly changing regulations, by having a difficult to understand planning system. We do it in many areas. In this case, just 6 or 7 years ago, Jersey went out, rightly or wrongly, I believe rightly in the sense that I think it's good to attract business to Jersey, but Jersey went out and put the flag up and said, we are interested in developing medicinal cannabis sector. We have seen interest in that obviously develop, and we now have 4 licensees in the island. But it is not those existing licensees that I'm most concerned with. For me, it is those who are Jersey farming families who are seeking to diversify. And I am concerned that by going with Deputy Wilson's unamended amendment, we will be making it harder for those farming families to maintain their interest in farming. And so I think we do need to send out consistent messages externally about investment in Jersey. And I think that this amendment does speak against that. So I ask the Assembly please to support this amendment. I think it's an appropriate compromise. It makes sure that the Agricultural Loans Fund cannot be dominated by the medicinal cannabis sector. It minimises the amounts that would be lent to the sector. And because of the nature of the panel, I believe most of those amounts, if any were to be lent, would be very much on the growing side and not on the processing side, and that would have a lot to do with the risk nature of it. So I do ask members to support the Council Minister's amendment in this, because I think it is important to maintain those messages to the industry and externally. Thank you, sir.
Is the appel called for? Thank you. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. all members the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Announcing amendment has been adopted. 28 votes for, 13 votes contre, and 3 abstentions. Now move back.
Thank members.
Sorry?
Thank members, sir.
I'll move back to the amendment as amended. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment as amended? Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir. I will just say, since nobody called for the vote names, I changed my mind, actually. I voted for the amendment, the government's amendment. I was persuaded by Deputy Curtis and by the ministers summing up. So therefore I will be supporting the final amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak? Minister.
Thank you, sir. Very similar to Deputy Renouf, it's, I will be supporting Deputy Wilson's amendment with this amendment. I think it's an appropriate amendment for us to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment as amended? No one else wish to speak. I call upon Deputy Wilson to reply. Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. And firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who had actually contributed to this debate. There are just a couple of things that I wanted to reference in response, and that is that I would urge Assembly members to just be mindful that when we do come to talk about the regulations for the agricultural loans going forward, that of primary concern is that we understand what we mean about diversification, and that this should not just only relate to diversifying into cannabis production. I think we have a lot more opportunity to explore what other types of crops indeed would actually bring value to the island. The other thing that I just wanted to mention was about risk. And whatever we do in relation to diversification of agriculture in the island, we need to be really clear about what kind of risk appetite the island has for high volatile agricultural industry, if I can put it that way. And what I would argue is that to sustain the island's farming base and rural economy, that we need to have a greater understanding of what that means, not only for the farmers, but also for the wider economy. And that includes taking into consideration some aspects of the public's opinion on that in terms of how their land and their environment is going to change, and it will change, if we see a proliferation of the kind of industrial units that we've already seen emerge relating to cannabis growing. I accept that the Minister's views around trying to find a middle way, but I'm also minded of the Environment Minister's comments about that he never envisaged that these loans would be used for that purpose. So I asked members to consider, how did we get here? Why do we find it necessary to consider diversification of our agricultural industry in this way? And for me, that's a question, I think, that has never fully been answered in relation to why public money is backing this kind of diversification. The other thing that, finally, sir, is I'd just like to communicate a message to the farming community per se. I was privileged to attend the recent conference, the farming conference, and just saw the amount of amazing produce that our farmers are engaged in delivering. And that's why I was motivated to produce this proposition, this amendment, because I could see that there is fabulous food produce on offer that we could really see a way forward for export as well as local production. And it is for that reason that I think if we've got any money to spare, that we should really be consolidating on the quality of genuine Jersey produce and making sure that we can sustain that going forward. So I thank members and call for the appel, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Announce the amendment has been adopted. 39 votes for, 4 votes contra, and 2 abstentions. Yes.
Those voting contra, the Conotub of St Clement, Deputy Coles, Wilson and Andrews, and Deputy Luce and Barbara Ward abstained.
The next amendment to be considered is the 8th amendment, lodged by Deputy Stevenson. And I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Paragraph B8. After the words Appendix 2, Summary Tables 5.1 and 5.2 of the report, insert the words, except that in Summary Table 5.1, the head of expenditure for the Cabinet Office should be reduced by 350,000 and the head of expenditure for education and lifelong learning should be increased by 350,000 to support a pilot project for the introduction of an additional sport and physical education component within Jersey Premium funding to run in 2026, with the same amount of funding to be made available in 2027. After the words appendix to the accompanying report, insert the words, except that on page 42, table 9, revenue heads of expenditure should be amended to reduce the head of expenditure for the Cabinet Office by 350,000 for each of 2026 and 2027, and increase the head of expenditure for education and lifelong learning by 350,000 for each of 2026 and 2027 to support a pilot project for the introduction of an additional sport and physical education component within the Jersey Premium funding to run in 2026 and 2027.
Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. And I didn't know that I could start to clear the chamber quite so quickly, but I might save that as a superpower for another day. But actually, it might speak to some of what is in my opening speech, actually. Because when I sat down to put this speech together, I thought about starting by going through all the very extensive research and evidence that exists locally, nationally, and internationally, which makes the case for this amendment and investment in sport and physical activity more generally. Figures that show how 1 in 4 children in Jersey starting school are overweight or obese, rising to almost 1 in 3 by the time they leave primary school. How just 1 in 5 children in Jersey are being active at or above the recommended level, and so on and so forth. How those on the lowest incomes often face many barriers to engaging in sport and physical activity. For those who have had the time to read it, the report accompanying my amendment does cite a lot of that local evidence. I don't plan on reciting it all here, there's no need. Because the truth is, many of us have heard it many times before, and we probably all accept the headline messages that a large proportion of our community, children, young people, and us adults too, we're not moving enough, despite recognising just how important to our physical and mental health physical activity is. And there are countless reports, strategies, and documents that all point in one direction, that we need to get people moving more. The most recent of those, I think, is Jersey's Population Health Prevention Strategy, launched by the Health Minister in 2023, which included an aim to improve opportunities for islanders to be physically active, with an emphasis on those who face barriers to improving their physical activity. And then there's the Children, Young People and Families Plan 2024, published jointly by a number of ministers, that included aims around making sure that children and young people in Jersey are healthy and happy. And it included things in it like enjoying the best health as they grow up, having space and opportunities to play, and being able to make healthy lifestyle choices. There is wide acceptance of the issue. It's backed up by really clear evidence, and the right words are in the right strategies. But what are we actually doing about it? Where is the action? Now, I know I said I wouldn't go through the statistics, but there is one report I would like to draw members' attention to at this point specifically, and that's the Jersey Child Measurement Programme and its latest report from 2024. It states repeatedly that childhood obesity levels in Jersey are stable. Now, we often hear stable used in a positive sense and talk about wanting stability for our island. But stability in this case is not a good thing. It's stable at far too high a level. 31% of Year 6 students are classed as obese over the past decade. That's stable, yes, but is it anything for us to be proud of? It's certainly not. We should not confuse stable with acceptable. And there's a pattern here, not just with children and physical activity, but more generally with preventative health at the most basic levels. We are barely moving the dial, if at all. And we have to step up as an island, as a community, as a government, as a state's assembly, and start backing up those words with some action. As the very many debates and ongoing discussions about health funding show, we cannot afford not to. Which brings me to this amendment. Here I'm offering members the opportunity to take some action in a practical, easy to implement and relatively low risk way. The amendment proposes a 2-year pilot scheme which would trial a sport and PE addition to the well-established Jersey Premium. In practical terms, primary schools would receive an extra £140 per eligible student plus a base grant of £5,000, which would be ring-fenced for investment in sport and PE. Schools would have the autonomy, as they do with the Jersey Premium funding, to decide how money is spent within guidance set by SIPES, and they would report on how they've spent the money annually as part of the Jersey Premium reporting structure, which is already in place. Now, I've chosen £140 as it is the average cost of a term of swimming lessons in the private sector here in Jersey. For many families on low incomes, swimming lessons of this kind are simply unaffordable. And while programmes are in place to help children learn to swim within school time, and some of those are funded via the government, others by charities and sponsors, there are gaps that do remain, and there are children who are not hitting the curriculum points that they should on swimming at a primary school level and a secondary school level. Top-up swimming lessons out of school time would be just one idea for how that money could be spent in a very targeted way. Others may choose to invest it into broader projects, such as walking bus schemes, or by running after-school clubs supported by local sport organisations, or by employing specialist sports coaches to expand and enhance what's already on offer. I know from talking to a number of them that our schools have many good ideas already about how such investment could benefit their young people. This amendment is not about criticising schools for the good work they already do, nor is it about trying to squeeze more into an already busy school day and a packed curriculum. The beauty of this scheme is that opportunities could be created before, during and after school. But it is based on an acknowledgement that not all schools prioritise sport and physical activity in the same way. By ring-fencing funding in this way, those who need a little extra encouragement to embrace the potential of sport and PE have an incentive and a requirement to do so. It's not about getting the money out the door or ticking boxes. The guidance would set out the responsibilities that schools would be working to. I'm conscious that this is the first amendment of this budget debate, although it won't be the last, which asks for money to be spent on something new. And I realise it may not necessarily be an easy sell to a tough crowd after a day yesterday spent debating the challenges of public finances and the need to live within our means. I'd like to reassure members that this amendment is not blind to that. It is targeted at low-income students and those who've ever been considered a looked-after child and would therefore be eligible for the Jersey Premium. It also targets just primary schools. Recognising that there's not unlimited funding, it makes sense to start with the youngest in our community who have the most to gain from adopting healthy habits at the earliest opportunity. Evidence also shows that, as I say, those from low-income backgrounds often face barriers to accessing sport and physical activity. This amendment is restrained and realistic. The amendment proposes a 2-year pilot scheme, after which the impact of the addition would be assessed and any decisions for future implementation and funding would need to be made. To be clear, I am not asking members today to agree to a long-term commitment or long-term funding. I'm also not asking for any new money to be found. This isn't about growth, and it doesn't expand the public sector. This proposed budget that we're here this week debating includes £615,000 a year within the Cabinet Office Head of Expenditure, which is allocated to the Chief Minister's Pilot Project Fund. This is not yet allocated, so this amendment does not propose taking money away from anyone or anywhere. It also leaves £265,000 a year in the pot for other spending. And as I say, the commitment only lasts for 2 years. The amendment is also carefully worded so that using the Pilot Project Fund is just one option. The money could come from elsewhere within the Cabinet Office budget. We should also consider the cost benefits of investment in sport and physical activity in terms of health, well-being, building communities, and also the economy. Much of this money would be spent locally, and some would be spent with local sports clubs and associations. This amendment would be an investment with returns in many ways. So before I finish, I'd like to reiterate 2 main things that I think it's a good opportunity to highlight in this assembly today. Sport and physical activity are powerful tools which we massively underestimate the value of. We need to change that, and government and this State's Assembly can lead the way in doing so. And I would urge ministers today and those coming in the future to really consider that as they start to look at long-term thinking around preventative health and more generally take it into account when we're talking about health spending as well. And it's time we stopped standing still and got moving, and the pun is absolutely intended there. We need to get moving on preventative health at the most fundamental levels. There is growth proposed in this budget around preventative health, but it does seem to come in later in the process of preventative health. What are we doing right at the beginning to encourage our community today and in the future to live healthier lives right from their youngest days as they grow up? I ask members to support this amendment and send out a message today that this State's Assembly is about more than just words, and we are serious about investing in healthier and happier futures for our young people. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, sir. I thank the Deputy. I'm in the position of rejecting this amendment in the most polite way I possibly can. I had a conversation with the Deputy the other day, and I know that the Deputy comes from a position of genuine concern and interest, and I genuinely respect that, and I respect her position. I must remind members that sport is already a key part of a broad and balanced curriculum in schools for all children and young people across our education establishments. And I would suggest that it is probably one of the most inclusive areas in our schools and in the school curriculum, with every child getting access to something that they can do in sport. Even myself, sir, I played right back for my school, and the joke is obviously right back in the changing room. But move on. So I want to recognise the amazing work in schools across this area. And this is not an absolute to say that no investment is being made. It is. There's an enormous amount going on across our schools. But there are some issues with the amendment, and I'll explain why I can't accept it. The transfer of funds would reduce money available for charities that have needed to rely on the Chief Minister's pilot fund in emergency situations. And that's the purpose of the fund, is to act as a funder of last resort. In recent years, it has been used to maintain important services such as Salvation Army, Butterfly Cafe, Brighter Futures and Sanctuary Trust. I do not see it as being a fund for ongoing funding for a system which is Jersey Premium. By comparison, this amendment would be a proactive policy choice to extend services and not identify a long-term funding allocation. And I recognise that was addressed. However, there would be an expectation of that long-term funding allocation and change the nature of the way that Jersey Premium is structured. And I'll come back to that just at the end. So it would raise the expectation of funding pressures elsewhere after the end of the second year. Our children are not in schools for just 2 years. They're in primary schools for 5, 6 years and beyond into secondary schools. So any funding would need to continue. And I do recognise the government's response to P70 2025 Amendment 10 would include establishment of a roadmap which considers a number of health improvement opportunities. I think we need to take a wider and joined up approach to this, including exercise, nutrition, and I do believe that we are starting to address nutrition with school meals and making some real changes to what children are eating in schools, which is a really positive thing, and I thank the Assembly again for their support with that, and mental wellbeing from childhood onwards. And the benefits of this amendment must be an integral part of that roadmap. So exercise alongside nutrition and mental wellbeing will be part of the health improvement opportunities roadmap to support children in schools. So I will say that access to high quality physical education for every child is a priority we all share, but this amendment, while having the correct intention, does need more work. We must ensure it fits with existing policy and delivers real impact, not just for Jersey Premium pupils, but for all. That means clear standards, strong quality checks and reliable data. Without these, we risk falling short of the good intentions. With Jersey Premium in particular, sir, I'll come back to it at the end because I want to put that very carefully together. The time-limited nature of the pilot funding is a challenge, as it does not identify long-term funding allocations. SIPES cannot guarantee continuing the approach given current funding priorities and the pressure on SEND and inclusion. And so I've been very open with the Assembly about our challenges around SEND. I presented the report to them, I've answered questions. There's been sometimes, I think, some poor reporting of the situation, but we are trying to act on that, and that is an integral part of our pressures going into the future. And we talked about nice-to-haves before. These are all things that are nice to have, but there are some things that are so essential as to what happens in our schools in the coming years that we have to address them as a matter of priority. And I think whoever is in this role in the coming years will not be able to guarantee funding in the way that we want. I'll also say, sir, that the impact of sport premium in England has not seen universal improvement, certainly of staff capability to deliver sport. Ofsted support suggests many teachers do not feel confident, and the impact across different groups has been inconsistent. Now, I know the UK is a larger jurisdiction, but it also has larger funding. A recent report in England by Ofsted notes that even after years of PE and sport premium funding, many primary school teachers still report low confidence in teaching PE. Only 56% said they felt confident. About 15% said they did not feel confident. This suggests that universal funding does not uniformly improve staff capability as intended. And we have to be very careful about spending tranches of money on individuals in the way it was suggested, because it may not be the best use of that money to get the maximum impact, particularly across our school. So I did have a brief discussion with the Deputy, and I apologise for not amending. I think we got caught up in some very late amendments that were really important. And to be honest, I couldn't find a simple way to amend. But I would be pleased if the Deputy would want to be involved in looking at small pilots in schools that will inform future developments. Because we do, sir, going into the future, have to look at where we are with Jersey Premium and in the way it's working. I think, and I will stand up and say in this Assembly, it has been a success. It has had an impact across our schools, particularly for the most needy. But we do have to look at a way in which Jersey Premium can be changed to be most effective, both in the way it deals with children with SEND and particular needs, but also in areas such as sport. But I would extend this further and say it has to be extended in areas such as music, such as art, because they are all beneficial to our children. But that takes a longer term joined up approach to this particular type of funding. And to do that piecemeal, and I don't mean that in a bad way, I'm trying to use language that is all positive in this. I know perhaps the language coming after I speak won't be perhaps as positive, but that's the way we're going. But we can't do it in an ad hoc way. We need to do this in a joined up way. So, sir, I recognise the intended benefits of the amendment and will continue to review the best approaches to support high quality, inclusive, sustainable sports education in schools. However, for the reasons given, particularly as taking money from the pilot fund, which I think will be essential next year, it may not be spent at the moment, but so the way that we are with society and the way it's going, I think it will be needed to support particular groups. And if that money's gone on something that should be central funding, and we don't have that central funding this year for this particular project, then I think we will regret that later term. So be careful, I would say, to Assembly members of the decisions you make today. So with all that in mind, and genuinely as positively as I can, I have to reject the amendment, ask members to reject the amendment, and offer that sort of olive branch of working with the department to see whether we can have smaller pilots to help develop a much stronger Jersey Premium offering across the board, both art, sports and education in general, in the coming years, months and decades of Jersey's education system. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. And I'm impressed but disappointed to hear the tone from the Education Minister. Impressed by the considered tone, which of course is good, but ultimately disappointed by the conclusion, because Deputy Stevenson has set out very clearly a rationale to improve the well-being and the health outcomes of our children and to embed better choices in their lives going forward, which is clearly a pilot project. And I don't need to reiterate any of the arguments that Deputy Stevenson so eloquently put forward. All I think I simply need to do is to pick up the point about the funding source and the pilot project fund. I think it became very clear in questions, I think that was just yesterday, that the pilot project fund is now being used to give money to charities that need a bit extra, which is not the purpose of the pilot project fund. It is there to get things started and to do something new, which is exactly what Deputy Stevenson is bringing here. I think it is a very sad state of affairs that this fund is being used to give money to charities when they're falling a bit short in a year. Yes, we did provide money in a previous government to the Butterfly Cafe, but that was because it was a start-up project and it fitted within the structure of the common strategic priorities at the time. And that was absolutely the right thing to do. It was a start-up and sadly it has failed, but it was there to provide some start-up funds. And I think Deputy Stevenson is quite rightly proposing a start-up to help deliver some change. That change can be measured, and if it is considered and seen that it is succeeding, then it should be taken on in a head of expenditure, whether that is health under the preventative health scheme or whether that is education because it is delivered through education. That is a matter for joined up government to find a solution and take it forward, because I have no doubt that this scheme would be successful if implemented, and I certainly support it and hope that other members will too.
Thank you, Deputy. Colin Tarperson-Brillard.
I'm sorry, I lit my light in error, sir.
Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. I will be supporting this amendment, and I want to echo what the previous speaker said, which was the first part of my speech. And I was a little bit confused by the speech before, which spoke about ongoing funding that shouldn't be sourced from the pilot fund. And it's quite clear to me from Deputy Stevenson's report that she is asking for a 2-year pilot project from the pilot project fund. And I do understand, Deputy Ward, he mentioned that many charities have had funds from this pilot project fund, and I know that as States members we support the charitable work that happens in our island, and I'm sure that these the grants that were given from that fund were really important. But that isn't the purpose of the fund, and I feel quite strongly that we need to think in a more sustainable way about funding of Jersey charities, especially given the increasing need in the island. But nevertheless, if this amendment were to succeed and that money was to be used from the pilot fund, which government want to use to help fund charities, I think it would also align with that, because Jersey Sport is the charity which would most likely be asked to deliver much of the work that would come out of this, and Jersey Sport is a charity. So I think it still aligns with that alternative use of that pilot fund. But to reiterate, it's asking for a 2-year pilot project, which I think is very reasonable. I also want to reflect on some of the speeches on previous amendments, and the phrase intergenerational fairness has been used, which I fully support and have mentioned in previous speeches with regards to children's rights. And I think this amendment goes a long way to improving the intergenerational fairness. And supports the direction that government are going in terms of looking at preventative health. I know that the Health Minister is very keen to address this and has given significant funding to preventative health, and I think that he probably would have liked to have more funding for preventative health measures. And so I hope that the Health Minister and his assistant ministers will feel able to support this, because what we do know about preventative health initiatives is that the earlier we invest that money, the better return we get on that money. And Deputy Stevenson mentioned this in her opening speech. It's like an upside down triangle. If we put £1 of investment in the early years in primary school, then we keep getting a return on that investment in terms of efficient use of taxpayers' money. So it makes fiscal sense to put the money in at this early stage for our children. And the Deputy has set out in her report and her speech tons of evidence. It's indisputable, the evidence behind this amendment. And I always like to follow an evidence-based approach, as I know most of us do. So I hope that members will consider this carefully and consider the evidence and the children who will be benefited from this amendment if it succeeds. And it's not just the Health Minister's intentions that I think this echoes, but it seems to me that actually it aligns with the wider government priorities, because we know from the Health Panel that the wider determinants of health ministerial group, I think, has already been established or is planning to be established, and that group will be looking at things exactly like this, and I would expect pilot projects like this one to come out of that group. But I don't want to wait, sir. I think that we should take the evidence and the proposal that has been brought to us by Deputy Stevenson and act on it today and initiate this pilot project. Some of the evidence that Deputy Stevenson has laid out, and I wanted to pick up on some of the characteristics associated with poor health, which was a Statistics Jersey publication, I think 2 years ago. And we're so lucky to have this wealth of evidence, I think, to put in our reports for these amendments, because we have Statistics Jersey and indeed Public Health that are presenting us with all of this evidence. And when are we going to listen to it and actually act on it? Today, hopefully. COVID, sir, has had a huge impact specifically on this area. And I recall when I was a primary school teacher and I taught 4- and 5-year-olds in a reception class, and for many years, every single one of my children that came through my class were taught to swim. I believe that this was a joint project between government and a charity. They had funded swimming lessons. This stopped during COVID, and I don't think it has ever properly returned to our primary schools. So there is a whole cohort of primary school children who are perhaps at the end of primary school or just leaving primary school that probably don't know how to swim because they didn't have access to these lessons and have been disadvantaged as a result. So another argument for supporting this is actually that we are still playing catch up from COVID. And this additional investment, I don't think it will actually completely catch up those children, but I think it's the very least that we can do, honestly. And swimming, I know, is just one of the sports that would be covered by this, but it's an essential skill on an island, and it's really alarming to hear actually the increasing numbers of children that are coming out of primary school, because it is a part of the primary school curriculum, in the same way that reading and writing is in the curriculum. It is something that children are entitled to be taught and expected to attain by the end of primary school. And we're failing children at the moment. So there is a need in this island, and I think we all know that need is growing. Again, if we look at some of the data from Joel's, the types of households that are struggling the most with the cost of living and therefore least able to afford lessons and clubs, active sporting clubs for their children, are single income families where there's only one adult running the household with children, but also all households with children are one of those groups that are being most affected by the cost of living crisis and most struggling with the cost of living. Birth rate is going down. We need to find ways to attract and keep families in the island, and having a holistic, well-rounded offering in our schools that includes not just artistic endeavours and academic endeavours, but sporting as well, is really, really important. So I'm emphatically supporting this amendment, and I hope that all members will give it serious consideration in light of our duty to give due regard to children's rights. The funds are there in this pilot project. This is the pilot project fund. This is a pilot project. It's evidence-backed. It makes sound financial sense in terms of efficient use of taxpayer money. We will get a good return on this investment. It will help families that need it the most. I think it's a very sensible, very well-evidenced amendment, and I hope members will support it.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I was on the education scrutiny panel around the time that Jersey Premium was introduced, and I regard it as most definitely one of the best innovations we've seen in how education is delivered to children in my time in the Assembly. It's an excellent scheme and something to be supported and expanded where possible, and that's why I was pleased to hear from the Education Minister his commitments in that regard and his commitment to work with the proposer of this amendment. To see how such a thing could be done in a clearly coordinated way. And that, of course, won't just include sport, but will include other things as well. And he mentions access to arts and culture as well, which has got to be a fundamental part of that. And I do think that the appropriate thing to do is to go by that route that is proposed by the Education Minister rather than this amendment. But for me, the crucial point here, and I'm sorry to make this point in this way, sir, but I do really think that the proposer and supporters of this amendment have got their funding source wrong. So the descriptions that we've seen of the pilot fund so far from previous speakers, I think don't really match the reality here. It may well have been the case in previous years of the pilot fund being used in that particular way, but my experience of seeing it for the last 2 years in government is that it most definitely is not the right source for this funding. First of all, sir, Jersey Premium is not a charity, it's a public service, and it ought to be funded like public services. But I don't think that should be a controversial thing to say. The pilot fund in previous years may well have been used for things under the previous government. It backed things that are on the public records that members can look at that I think were a waste of taxpayers' money. But in the 2 years of this government, that fund has been used effectively to support charities in Jersey when they've needed it. And given the landscape we know there is in Jersey of charities struggling and the pressures that are going to come to us in future years. I personally think it would be absolutely devastating to not be able to support those organisations when necessary because of not having enough funding in the pilot fund for that. I know of at least one example of that fund being used for something connected to my remit, where had we not been in a position to be able to offer that funding and a charity had suffered as a result of that, we would have ended up having to have spent a lot more money as a government to make up for what would have been lost through that charity not being able to continue its work without that support. So that fund exists now to do that. It might not have been that case in previous years, but now that's what that fund exists and is used for. It's not there to supplement public services, and Jersey Premium is a public service, not a charity. So if you want to find a source of funding, this most definitely is not it.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Gardner.
I put my light on, thank you, sir. I put my light on because I believe that charity for years crying for proper commissioning framework. This framework should be developed by now. PAC, CNAG and scrutiny, everyone told that the charity needs to be supported with 3 years long-term funding and not gifts from various sources. And this is why I decided to start, and this is where I think maybe the Chief Minister Fund needs to be called Charity Fund or need to be called Grants Fund or anyway how we call it. Let's not to mix between Jersey Premium and supporting sports activities and supporting, by the way, Jersey Sport, I know there was a bit, it's not a charity, we know it's arm's length bodies and they deliver sport. But let's not use the charities in this debate. Charities deserve better and they need proper sustainable funding and not to walk around.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? Deputy Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry to say that I don't think I can support this amendment. While I'm pleased that Deputy Stevenson has raised this subject, and pleased to hear that the Minister will be looking at how to improve and extend Jersey Premium, I can't support an amendment that will take funding from the Chief Minister's pilot fund. I'm currently in conversation with a number of charities and projects that desperately need funding, some to do with children, and therefore cannot support any amendment that will depend on the pilot fund, which is, in practice, supporting charities.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else? Deputy Renouf, then Conatava Greville. Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir. I'm only going to speak very briefly, but I do think this is the most bizarre situation. We have a pilot fund, and the government's response to not using the pilot fund is to say it's no longer a pilot fund. We've decided to change its purpose without telling anyone. It's now a charity support fund, and the only argument that is being advanced against using it is that they've diverted the money into a different form, a different use. It's extraordinary. The proposer of this amendment has done nothing more than go back to the original purpose of the fund. The original purpose of the fund. Her only error is to respect that original choice. What an error. To go back to the basics, to go back to the original purpose. I was in two minds about this amendment, actually, but on the basis that the arguments advanced so far by the government are so hopelessly weak, I'm going to support it.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatava Greville.
Yes, sir. I have a pilot project for you. My colleague to my left, the Conatava St Clements, and indeed the scrutiny panel that I'm a member of, have been advocating the conversion of some of the facilities at the Rockier School for many years. And in fact, I'm sure the Conatava of St Clement will back me up in this, in so much as it's been a long time now that we've been campaigning for the improvements of public access sporting facilities in St Clement's, Greville and St Martin, because we are literally a desert with regards to that. There are some private benefactors like the Greville Chef Tenors who provide those facilities for our parishioners, but we have nothing in the east of the island with regards to this. How about spending some money on converting the facilities at La Rocquiere for public access sport? Not only for the young generations and Jersey Premium, but for their mums and dads, the older generations as well. That would be a wonderful project to support, but I don't support money being taken out of this fund to do it, because I think there's other funds that we can use for that purpose. But I won't be supporting this. Thank you, sir.
Does anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? No. Yes. Deputy Kovacs.
Thank you, sir. I want to speak in support of the intention behind this proposal. The case for strengthening physical activity for our children, especially those from our most disadvantaged families, is clear. Too many young people are not meeting recommended activity levels. Cost is still a great barrier for many of them to have it done outside of school hours, and the targeted approach can improve long-term health. However, I cannot support using the Chief Minister's Pilot Fund. That fund has kept vital charities going during crises and in some cases prevented them from going under entirely. It is not the right source for this type of policy initiative. I do support the principle. Schools need better guidance and support to offer more physical activity to the children who need it most. One way we could achieve this is through joint work between preventative health and SIPes. Their combined expertise fits well with the government's comments, having planned to develop a health improvement roadmap covering exercise, nutrition, and mental well-being. The government has said that the aims of this amendment will be considered within that work, and I welcome that. I also welcome the Minister's statement that this can be done within existing resources without extra budget. Physical activity must remain a core part of wider healthy lifestyle options for children, especially those facing additional barriers. The reassurance from the Minister that this work is already underway, even though a different route, makes me comfortable to support this approach instead. I also welcome the Minister's plan to review the Jersey Premium with the view to extend it and to ensure it continues to be effective for the children who rely on it. And the offer to work with the Deputy on a suitable pilot aligned with the direction of this amendment. With that reassurance, I'm content to follow the government's approach while still pushing for the same goal, giving every child, especially the least advantaged, the chance to be active, healthy, and confident, and doing so without the need for additional funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? No one else wishes to speak. I call upon the Deputy to reply. Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure what's worse, to stand up here and have your ideas and your work really criticised and told it's a load of rubbish, or to be told very politely, no, I know that's not what was said, or to be told really politely that actually it's got merit, we agree with all the evidence, but we're not going to do it anyway. That's a personal comment about how it feels to stand up here when you've brought an amendment. It's something you've worked really hard on for over a year. I'm grateful to all members who've spoken today, and we have shown, many of us, that we do get it. We get the words, we get the evidence, we've read it, we've heard it, we've seen it ourselves. I still question what we're doing about it. And I'm yet, unfortunately, to hear an answer. But of course, I will work with those who likewise want to help find those answers. And I welcome any opportunity to do so now and in the future as well. I'm not going to go through everything in detail, but as I say, I thank all those who did respond. I would like to just respond to a few points made by the Education Minister, and I'm grateful for his careful consideration and the conversation we did have the other day as well on this. And as I say, I would welcome working with him and others in future. The Minister did refer to it, I think, to sport and physical activity as a nice to have. And I get where he's coming from in the, or he alluded to it within a pot of needs within a department that has huge pressures about some very, very fundamental, sometimes life and death type scenarios. I get that, the pressures are huge. But I would argue that actually there comes a tipping point when we need to start considering sport and physical activity as part of that process, part of those solutions. And I'd give an example. The Minister referred to the challenges around SEND, particularly within schools, and his budget and his department. Now, while I was Assistant Minister with responsibility for sport in the previous government, one of the projects I went to see was at Hope Valley School. And they were using some money that I think had been raised by one of the British Lions visits. And they were using it on a project to encourage young people within that school with various challenges in different ways to engage in sport and physical activity when being in a classroom was overwhelming for them. And it meant that they were staying in school and they might go out and have a break. One of the examples we saw was boxing, for example. They'd go out, they'd do it within a controlled, led environment, but with the space to express themselves. And then actually they had some, can't remember the figures, but they had the evidence and the data which actually showed it was really working. Those kids were staying in school. They weren't disappearing off, or it wasn't overwhelming them so much that they couldn't stay there for the day. They would go back into classes later, or they would develop relationships with the staff who were in that room, who then found ways to enhance their education in other ways around those experiences of being active. So actually, just to emphasise the point that I think it can be part of the solutions in the very real challenges that I know that department and our island generally are facing as well. And I would like to see us start to change the language around the use of that. It's not, I'm not saying the Minister described it as exactly this, but it is not a nice to have. For me, it is a fundamental part of the education and the upbringing that we as a society should be giving to our young people. Just a quick note on the UK scheme that the Education Minister referenced. That only, I think, provides £10 per student, and it is universal. It's not targeted at low-income families. So, yes, they have much larger schools, so the pots tend to be large, but it is a slightly different scheme. There are reports, I think, as the Minister alluded to, that it's got some pros, it's got some cons. I think the statistics about teachers feeling confident teaching sport and PE, question without the extra funding, would the figure have been even lower? I don't know. I've not read the report in detail, but actually I don't think that's a strong enough argument to just say that that's a failure over there. But I appreciate it's a different place with a different amount and a different scheme there. Small pilots in a small number of schools, I think, is a way that we could have worked this, and perhaps on another day we could have seen an amendment which might have achieved that. I'm grateful to Deputy Moore for her contribution, and Deputy Doublé also. Deputy Doublé referred to the indisputable evidence, and I'm really grateful to her actually for pointing that out, because I did work hard on that report, but it wasn't hard to bring together, if that makes sense, because there is so much evidence out there. And I think when you compare that to some of the other perhaps amendments, but also some of the proposals we have within this budget here this week that we're considering, there's probably more detail and evidence within that 3-page report than there is on a lot of the things that we're here to discuss for multi-million pounds this week. I'm also grateful to the likes of Deputy Curtis and Deputy Kovacs for their interest as well, and disappointed obviously that they can't support, but I know they're both great supporters of children, young people and sport and physical activity as well, so I'm sure it won't be the last discussion we have about it. And also to Deputy Renouf, and appreciate the point that he made about the funding source. And as you can probably tell, I and the Minister himself, we've approached this in a very collegiate way so far. But actually, I think this debate did take a turn when we did start to talk about the funding source. And it really would, I just can't not raise it here today, that what are we doing when we have an argument about a pilot project fund like this? And I appreciate the arguments around using it for something different and for charities. But I would note that yesterday the Chief Minister, in answer to an oral question from me, did refer to the many millions of pounds that government gives to charities via social security. This amendment isn't saying don't give charities any money and take it all away from them. It's £350 from one source, which is currently being used by this government for charities. It's absolutely not saying touch. And I think the Chief Minister yesterday did quote a fund, I think it was tens of millions, that refers to charities. It's not saying that. But I'm now left questioning, at the end of this debate, around accountability and transparency, to be perfectly honest. Because I'm a member of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and we did ask a question about the pilot project fund of the Treasury Minister as part of our review into this budget. And that response, which is published online, refers to the amount that's proposed in this budget for including within that fund, which is £615,000. It's allocated annually. And it states that funding requests, they come from a sponsoring department, they're accompanied by a business case, they're signed by the finance business partner and chief officer or delegates, or comparable assurance, with either a ministerial decision or the chief minister approving the business case to authorise the expenditure. All expenditure is governed by the Public Finances Manual. Goes on about underspends and how they're treated like everything else. Nowhere there does it say that actually this isn't a pilot project fund anymore. What does that say about transparency? And how is scrutiny able to hold the government to account on that? How are members here today able to consider a budget that has gaps in it like that? What are we approving today? I think that's actually a really important point. It may be an oversight by the government, and I'm not saying it's being done for any particular reason, but it is important, and I think it does need calling out. I'm now going to lose where I was speaking because I've gone on a rant about that. So, yes, I think that was an important thing to point out, to raise, and actually it does leave me questioning in a budget, and I wanted to make some comments when we come back to the overall budget debate at the end of the week. I do intend to make some comments around how some of the information is being presented in the budget this year, because over my years of reading and seeing Jersey's budgets, government plans, medium-term financial plans, it seems to be that we're getting less and less information. We're getting fewer and fewer heads of expenditure. We're getting less clear titles for things. It's not a criticism of the minister, but I also sit on the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, and there is £1.8 million allocated in growth for projects in the Social Security budget, which has a couple of lines with very little explanation in the budget. And when the Scrutiny Panel was asked as part of its budget review for more information, it's under development. And I get that. Things take time to work out, and it's useful to know you've got the money before you spend the time doing it. But again, there is a balance to be struck, and it comes back to transparency and accountability. And as members, when we're being asked in this assembly to put our names to something, to say, yes, we agreed to that, I don't think it's good enough, quite frankly. Thank you, sir. I ask for the appel, please.
Thank you, Deputy. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the chance to cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the amendment has been rejected. 11 votes pour, 32 votes contre, and 1 abstention. Now move on to the 31st amendment, lodged by the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. I'll ask the Greffier to read the amendment.
Paragraph B8. After the words Appendix 2, Summary Table 5.1 and 2 of the report, insert the words, except that in Summary Table 5.1, Revenue Heads of Expenditure, 250,000 of the Cabinet Office Head of Expenditure for 2026 should be reserved as a ring-fenced budget line for the development of policy mechanisms to address empty residential properties, with this funding not to be drawn from the existing housing budget within the Cabinet Office Head of Expenditure.
Deputy Chair.
Thank you, sir. And this amendment proposes allocating 250,000 to restart and deliver policy development on empty properties. But, sir, in the spirit of compromise and fiscal realism, we recognise the importance of pragmatic approach. So the rest of the scrutiny panel accepts Deputy Curtis's amendment, reducing the allocation to 25,000. So this ensures that at the very least, government can finally buy in the expertise needed to provide the support to the policy team to do some groundwork on designing a mechanism and scope the legal architecture, which still relying on the heavy lifting of in-house expertise. So this is an amendment that is modest in cost but significant in its impact. An amendment that starts the work this Assembly has already agreed is necessary to tackle one of the most frustrating and visible failures of our housing system, the existence of long-term empty homes across our island. It's a small allocation, deliberately small, but a vital one. The Environment, Housing, Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel brought forward this amendment because the evidence could not be clearer. The Jersey Youth Assembly were asked to scrutinise the budget and identified repurposing empty homes as the second most preferred way of improving access to housing, and an empty homes tax as the single most supported policy option out of 14. Young people told us directly that they are tired of watching houses rot while they struggle to find somewhere to live, tired of a system that allows valuable homes to sit unused while families are priced out. If any of us want to speak seriously about the next generation, then we must listen to them when they tell us what matters. And the Assembly has already agreed with them. In 2022, through P48, members voted to introduce an effective mechanism to discourage long-term residential vacancy. That decision has not been undone. What has stopped progress is not political disagreement, but a total absence of resources. The Minister has consistently told this Assembly in scrutiny we would have moved P48 2022 on if he had had the resources, and he was clearly disappointed that the previous Minister lost the allocated unspent money needed for the work to progress. The Minister of Housing has been entirely candid on this point. In the Assembly on the 25th of February 2025, he stated plainly, "I do not have the resources within my budget at this point to pursue the kind of option that I would like to help tackle empty homes." In scrutiny hearings, he elaborated further, and I paraphrase, "The previously allocated £500,000 for this work was surrendered almost entirely unspent. The internal capacity to progress the policy no longer exists, and without new funding, he cannot move forward on an empty home mechanism." The Minister has been also clear to scrutiny and to the Assembly that empty homes do matter, and the government must find a way to put these homes to use. On this, there is no disagreement. Again, there is only a lack of resource. So today we have an opportunity to fix that, even with this most modest amount, because it gets the work off the shelf and back into motion. Without this funding allocation, whether it was the original 250,000 or the 25,000 now there with the acceptance of Deputy Curtis's amendment, the Minister told us unequivocally that nothing will happen unless he drops other work he has set. At the budget scrutiny hearing, I asked the Minister about policy setting and asked if there were regular discussions to set policy direction. He explained, "I regard that as always happening." We were told in a letter to scrutiny of what the Minister has prioritised for 2026. Social rents policy review and report to the States Assembly in accordance with the requirements of P29 2025, as amended. Begin scoping and delivery of the property transaction process consultation in accordance with the requirement of P61 2025, as as amended. Homelessness in Jersey report quarterly data collection and reporting, annual review of social housing eligibility criteria, and annual review of assisted purchasing schemes eligibility criteria. There was no mention of empty homes or moving P48 2022 forward, even ahead of propositions that have come forward in 2025. During the budget scrutiny hearing, I asked whether he or future minister could undertake this work within existing resources. The answer was clear from the minister. It was no, not unless he or they, future ministers, cut something else. They would need either new funding or approval in a future budget cycle. What has changed for the government to propose that this work can now be done with no extra funding? So bringing empty homes back into use is not only socially responsible, it is fiscally responsible, because it increases housing supply without taking a single inch of greenfield land, avoids costly new infrastructure, supports the vitality of our parishes and strengthens community cohesion. This amendment does not commit us to a specific policy model, does not grow the public service. It simply gives government the minimum resource to progress the work this Assembly has already voted should be done. We know long-term empty houses are a concern. The Minister knows empty houses matter. Young Islanders have told us empty homes matter. We cannot continue having the answer there was no budget to do the work. With this amendment now reduced to 25,000, we can remove that excuse once and for all. Let's not overthink it. Let's not over-politicise it. I urge members to support the amendment as modified and to clearly signify clearly that when the next generation asks us to act, we do not look the other way. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So could I just ask a point of order, please,
Yes.
or it might be a point of clarification from yourself, because there are two proposed amendments
Yes.
to this amendment, and in her speech, the chair of the panel spoke of accepting the amendment from Deputy Curtis, and I wasn't sure if she was proposing the amendment as amended.
No, there's going to be a separate debate on both amendments.
Thank you, sir.
So there are two amendments to this amendment, one from the Council of Ministers and one from Deputy Alex Curtis. And the first to be debated is the one lodged by Deputy Curtis. And I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph 1. And for the figure 250,000, substitute the figure 25,000. After the words empty residential properties, insert the words such policy to be developed in-house with funding available for minor external input only if required.
Deputy Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I won't take long on this amendment to the amendment. I brought it because I could not personally support forcing an allocation of 250,000 to new work. We have all been told to exercise restraint and pragmatism, and this was my effort to ensure that where work was brought forward, I could do so. I did consider what the Council of Ministers have proposed, and I was told by officers that was not an allowable change, as it would fundamentally remove a line of funding, negating it. So I am surprised that the Council of Ministers one was ruled in order. Nevertheless, I now consider, and still consider, mine to be the most appropriate course of action, and I will explain briefly why. The policy area that is being proposed is an important one. And we often know that what gets counted and what gets measured gets done. A small but realistic allocation of money in 2026, £25,000, helps, I think, focus and drive accountability that this is an area of work that needs delivery. It recognises that there should be no excuse for any small external resource to facilitate this, but I think we need to be honest. If the money is not spent because it is not needed, that is a very common occurrence in government budgets. I do not believe this materially challenges the flexibility of government to deliver, and I believe that having a single £25,000 line item in will help ensure that policy is developed. We must remember this is an election year. The key mechanisms will be determined by the next Assembly, and this is a pragmatic approach. Thank you. I make the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded? Yes, sir. Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Minister.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to Deputy Alex Curtis for bringing this amendment, but I should make clear from the outset that I personally don't support the amendment quite obviously because I have my own amendment to it, which takes precedence for me. And the reasoning for that is very simple, which is that for 2026, so forgetting years beyond that, but for 2026, I don't really know what this money will actually go on, and I don't know if something is conjured to spend it on, whether £25,000 would be the right amount for it. I cannot offer an explanation with any degree of credibility as to what that would be and why that amount of money is the right amount for it, which is why I proposed an alternative amendment instead, which says let's use next year to do any initial policy work on bringing empty homes back into use. And from there, we see where we go, and maybe that will mean financial implications for 2027, and we can get best use of that once we've done the preliminary work to understand how most effective we could dedicate ourselves to a project to introduce mechanisms to bring empty homes back into use. But next year, I cannot tell you what that money would be and whether that money would be enough for it. In this amendment, it talks about spending that externally, so I'm guessing that means a consultant or something to that nature. That's something that, at this moment in time, the government is trying to reduce and not do that. That's not to say we couldn't make a strong argument for an exception from time to time if that does become abundantly necessary. But right now, we don't know if it is necessary. Maybe it is, but we'll get that clarity next year, not right at this very moment. And if we did somehow conclude that we needed to make an exception to that and bring some external expertise into this, I've got absolutely no idea if £25,000 would be enough for it. So I absolutely appreciate that Deputy Alex Curtis is trying to be helpful here, and both of us have the same aim in that we want to see mechanisms put in place to get much better use of the stock of homes in the island, where too many are empty, and they're empty for a multitude of different reasons that might require different kinds of mechanisms to address that. But simply for putting that on the agenda and developing a work programme for next year, I don't see how this would enable that. Perhaps we come back to it in 2027 if it becomes apparent at that point. But for next year, this funding, I simply can't tell you how we spend it, in which case I say, could we instead please defer to my amendment, which gives us a bit of a freer hand in that sense to in-house do what we can to say, right, these are what we think the mechanisms will be, and if we then need to have any other allocation for that in future, then that's what we can come to at that point. But rather than just taking a stab in the dark, let's come back to it when the picture is a bit clearer. And so I would ask members to reject this amendment and instead support the amendment that I hope to have the opportunity to make a case for shortly.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, sir. And I don't want to necessarily repeat what I said earlier as the scrutiny panel, but I want to be clear that, of course, we started with 250,000 because the 500,000 was set for 2 years of the work that was originally put for to be able to implement P48 2022. So we felt that that was, without any other information, that seemed to be the logical amount. But discussing with Deputy Curtis, realised, and being pragmatic, that maybe we needed to reduce this. But we feel that we need to have some money because consistently the Minister has been saying over the last year, 2 years, that he has not got money because the last Minister was unable to spend it, didn't spend it, and it was put back. Consistently, we've heard from the Minister in the Assembly and in scrutiny when asked about this, that he cannot continue the work exactly because he hasn't got the money to do that. Therefore, I find it interesting, and now suddenly the Minister is standing up and saying, we don't need the money because he can do it in-house. But we have consistently seen that the work for the last 2 years has stalled. It has stalled, it hasn't been pushed forward. P48 has not been pushed forward, so it's still sitting on the shelf because only because, apparently, in the Minister's word, there is not the resources to do it. And I don't understand now that suddenly the Council of Ministers is coming and saying, actually, we'll be able to do this work in-house without resources, when before we've been consistently told the last 2 years, and therefore we've had a big delay on being able to get any mechanism moving forward, any work on this. And so the 25,000 is specifically there to help kickstart this work, and so that potentially the next minister in the next government can come to the budget for next year with a clearer plan to be able to show that there is something that we can move forward and actually have the amount that the minister has just said to be able to do the more substantial work on this, because we've heard from the youngsters, we've heard from the minister, and we've heard continuously that this is an issue. And as I said before, and I listed, even when we pushed the minister during the budget scrutiny panel to see if he's thinking about empty homes, he said no, because there's no resources. And this, we feel, as scrutiny panel, is why we felt we needed to put some resources towards this. This is why now we support Deputy Curtis in reducing that amount, being more realistic, to just kickstart that work, take it off the shelf, try to catch up a little bit on the last 2 years of hearing, apparently, the excuses that because there's no work done, because there's no resources, we're now saying there are resources, there's a little bit, let's start this work, so help this minister, future minister, be able to actually put a strong case to the next budget to actually get some more substantial money to get this mechanism up on the ground. I did not hear from the minister why he's put propositions that were agreed this year ahead of something that was already agreed in 2022 and has had consistently strong support from this Assembly as well and from the young people. So I'd urge members to support Deputy Curtis's amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Tadia.
Thank you, sir. I rise slightly uncomfortably to gently have to disagree with my party leader and the housing minister on this, but I think we're united on the overall principle of still wanting to get to the root of the problem. What we've got before us now is, do we give the housing minister an extra £25,000, which he may or may not need, as a guarantee to maybe be able to do the work next year? And of course, it's not necessarily this housing minister. It could be a future housing minister, which may well not be, and I hope it won't be this minister, because I'm sure he's destined to greater things, albeit that housing is very important, sir. And so actually, when we're talking about safeguarding the work of any future minister for this, which may be started by this minister and concluded by a different one of our colleagues, Reform Jersey, I think I'd be much more comfortable if I knew that I or my Reform Jersey colleagues had that £25,000 buffer, that we could actually do a meaningful piece of work on this. Because it is true that I brought the proposition back in 2022. Sometimes my name gets left off that, that's fine, I don't mind too much. It was supported virtually unanimously, apart from by one member who's no longer in the Assembly, so you vote against sometimes at your own peril, sir. But it did. He's still alive, don't worry. And I think he thought that maybe what I was proposing around empty properties was perhaps a fad that he didn't want to support. But so the rest of the members didn't agree, and they did want action on this. So let's look at, first of all, what was agreed then. It was that an effective mechanism should be introduced to discourage domestic properties from being left vacant for long periods, and to request the Minister for Housing and Communities to initiate the necessary arrangements for the preparation of an options paper identifying potential mechanisms with a view to publication before the end of September 2022. Positively homeopathic, you might say, the extent to which Part B has been watered down to make it as acceptable as possible, but even that wasn't done in the last 3 years. But we do have to go back further than that, of course, because there was a scrutiny report issued in 2025, and I look across the chamber to now Constable of St Mary's, who was, I think, the deputy at the time, and one of the findings from that review, and recommendations, in fact, said that by January 2016, The Minister for Housing should investigate the possibility of bringing back empty homes into use using a variety of tools, including the introduction of a form of empty property tax or charging an annual sum in addition to the current parish rates. The ministerial response to that, it said neither accept nor reject. It said the issues of, so this is the ministerial position, the issues of vacant homes and how to bring more back into use within the property market will be addressed in a future policy paper. Still waiting for that paper, I think. It will be addressed in the future policy paper to be published by the Strategic Housing Unit. This paper will consider all of the potential options to address these issues, including that of using fiscal measures. However, it is not considered feasible that it can be achieved by January 2016, at which point I will whisper to myself, no, Sherlock. So I think there's something happened to my microphone there. And the draft Housing Strategic Unit expects that this work can be delivered by the second quarter of 2016. So they couldn't quite agree on which quarter of 2016 it would be delivered to. But pretty academic, I'd say now, that we're going to be 10 years on from that, and still we're waiting for action to take place. So I don't rise to criticise this minister, I don't rise even to criticise the previous minister, but I do think that the Assembly is still owed a review of this, and we are owed a mechanism by which to put empty properties back onto the market. I'll leave my comments there because there are probably some comments I'd like to make in the main debate about why we still need and why this is still a valuable idea, sir. But I personally would be much more comfortable putting that small sum on the table so that if this minister or a future minister says, you know what, actually, we've agreed a policy platform, we now need to do a little bit more work after 10 years to investigate what the options are, perhaps bring somebody in to give us a bit of impartial and expert advice. That £25,000 buffer is on the table, and I think it will help to resolve, hopefully, the issue that we've identified in the past, but also that our young people today who have stood up in this Assembly have also been identifying as an issue now and into the future if it's not tackled, sir.
Deputy, your reference to Dr. Holmes was unparliamentary.
I would like to take that back, sir. Thank you.
Yes, does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition, this amendment? Deputy Renouf.
So yeah, I'll just rise to express some surprise, perhaps bordering on astonishment, because the Minister said a version of, and if he's got given the money for next year, he couldn't think of anything to spend it on. And I find that surprising because, of course, empty homes is in his party manifesto from the last election. It's a priority in the Housing Crisis Action Plan as well. But now he's minister, he doesn't seem to know what he'd do if he got given some money to address the issue. The other thing I think that's surprising has been pointed out by the chair of the scrutiny panel, who said that the story has changed over the course of 2 years. He said for 2 years he didn't have resources, but if we're to take at face value what he just said, what it turns out he should perhaps have been telling us is, I don't have any resources, but even if I did have some resources, I don't know what I'd do with them. I do find it surprising that the Minister doesn't want a small amount of money to address what is acknowledged by all of us, I think, I hope, as a serious issue for the island. I think I wrote in my own manifesto about a house in my own parish that has been empty for my entire adult life. And we seem just to accept that, and we should not accept it. It is a crisis for this island that we have that many of those houses are in country locations as well. There will be specific reasons for why some of them will be empty. Some of those will be entirely legitimate. But we are also entitled as a society, when the cost of building new houses is so high, to ask whether some of those houses should not be brought back into use. And it should be a priority for this Assembly and for this government, as for, I hope, previous governments and future governments, that we will do something about that. It is a very small ask that the amendment from Deputy Alex Curtis would put obligation that would put on the Minister, and I would hope that he would accept it and rise to the challenge of finding something to spend it on.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to join Deputy Reniff, who's spent a lot of time being astonished over the last couple of days. And I say I'm in a permanent state of astonishment doing this role sometimes. But there's also a surprise. And members shouldn't be surprised that this government is actually trying to do work without requiring new money to do it. We're trying to do as much as we can within resources, and quite simply what we're saying here. And I know that Deputy Mezek and his team take this situation very seriously. Empty housing is a challenge, but it's a complex issue to solve, as the previous government will know, because there are often very complex ownership arrangements around empty houses, some of which have been empty for decades. And I think basically what the government is saying, what Deputy Mezek is saying, we will do the work in 2026. I know they're giving a great deal of consideration to the matter now and have been. But all they're saying is we don't need 250,000, we don't need 25,000. We can do it in our own resources. And for example, if next year concludes internally that the solution is to introduce empty dwelling management orders, for example, then I'm not sure that will need £25,000. And if it does, then the amendment to the amendment will say the money's sat there. So it's really neither here nor there. If I'm absolutely honest, whether we support Deputy Curtis's or the amendment to the amendment by the Council of Ministers, which I support because it's our amendment, of course, not going to make a lot of difference. We're still going to do the work, but we do not need the money to do it. So that's, I think, a new culture we have to try and adopt in this Assembly. We don't always need new money. Sometimes we can do stuff from our existing resources. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? No one else wish to speak. I call upon Deputy Alex Curtis-Drucker.
Thank you, sir. I thank members who spoke on this amendment, and I hope that with a couple of words and the almost support I have there from the Chief Minister, that the Council of Ministers can bridge the gap, join me on this and show a little more support and commit to maybe the accountability that a line in the budget would give them. To address that the Minister's key points, and I thank him for his response, were around he wouldn't know what to do with the money. The point of this is to focus in mind that there still is an absolute requirement for government to develop policy options for the estates to consider for what is a pressing issue. There are all sorts of reasons one needs money in developing policy, particularly complex policy like this. And whilst the Chief Minister is keen to say that they want to not spend new money, first, this is money from the Cabinet Office. It isn't new money, it's reprioritising of money. 25,000, not a lot. But that gets one quite a few different things that help in ensuring policy development is not slowed. Independent survey or consultation, academic expertise, legal expertise, and perhaps even any extra policy resource. I would hope this would not go on policy resource. There are specific areas, however, in which government is wise to go and seek external advice. £25,000 came from considering often the quantum of days one might get, looking to how much scrutiny may pay for that kind of independent expert advice. That helps it enormously in providing evidence-based reports. And we've heard that it's important that the minister does not, or whichever future minister, does not turn around in the future and say, I had no money to progress a key element of this policy work. I don't think allocating £25,000 is the end of the world here or there. I do think that understanding that it's not about never spending money outside of government, it is about appropriate and proportionate spending of money by government on the expertise it requires at the right time. I think 25,000, whilst I did have to choose a number, can be justified as anything from 15 days to 60 days, depending on using lawyer, consultant, academic, or commissioning of a survey. I think there are certain deliverables one can fit in that sum. I definitely think that this Assembly should signal it is an area there should be no excuses, that policy work continues. I think this is the right amendment to deliver that mandate, and I call for the appel.
So, can I just ask a quick question? Sorry.
Of me or of the
It is, it's yourself, so it may well be the greffier, but I'm sure you know.
Yes.
If this amendment is voted for, does the subsequent amendment from the Minister fall away?
It falls away, yes, that's right.
Just confirming that people understand that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. The appeal has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. Greffier is invited to open the voting. Give all members the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to You can still vote. I haven't said close the voting yet. All right, close the voting. Is there any votes? I announce that the amendment has been rejected. 16 votes pour, 27 votes contre.
Can we get the name, sir?
Yes.
Those voting pour, the connotables of Grouville, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour, deputies Tadier, Lehegara, Gardner, Balash, Coles, Wall, Miles, Renouf, Jearn, Kovac, Alex Curtis and Deputy Stevenson. You want the other way?
Can I propose the adjournment for lunch, please?
Members content to adjourn? Chief Minister, you want to say something?
No, I think it's too late, so I was going to propose we just finish this off, but I think the amendment's been made.
Yes. Assembly's adjourned until 2:15.